joining us today. First, we share our deepest condolences with the families of department staff who passed since the board's September meeting. The staff who have passed are retired officer Alan Johnson, retired officer Richard James, retired officer Terry Simone Daly, and retired Captain David J. Miller. Next, we have an update on census data. Bless you. As of October 6, 2024, there were approximately 6,583 individuals in department custody. And broken down by facility, in Bellevue Hospital Prison Ward, 47, Elmhurst Hospital Prison Ward, 6 people in custody, at EMTC, 1,545, GRVC, 991, NIC, 231, OBCC, 1,446, RESH, 171, RMSC, 406, RNDC, 1,070, and in West Facility, 669. And regarding reporting, in the coming weeks, BOC will issue its heat monitoring report. And before the end of the year, BOC will issue a public report on the deaths of Anthony Jordan and Charisma Jones. Also, following discussions with the department, BOC will issue a report assessing the department's PREA complaint investigation process. And this work is currently being done by our violence prevention team in the absence of a PREA research associate. And that concludes my updates, but next I'm going to turn it over to BOC's Assistant Executive Director of Research, Navina Chaitu, who will present findings and recommendations from BOC's report on the utilization of sick call in New York City jails.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Navina Chaitu, and I am the Assistant Executive Director of Research at the New York City Board of Correction. Today, I'll be presenting findings and recommendations from our report on the utilization of sick call in New York City jails. On the next slide, if we have the slides, I'll discuss the definition and requirements of sick call. As we wait for them to get it up, I'm going to continue just in the interest of time. So in its minimum standards, the board defines sick call as an encounter between a person in custody and healthcare personnel for the purpose of assessing and/or treating a medical complaint. The minimum standards further specify that sick call is to be provided daily, Monday through Friday. We're just checking to see if the sound is working. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I'll start over for the folks at home. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I am Navina Chaitu. I'm the Assistant Executive Director of Research at the New York City Board of Correction. And today I will be presenting findings from our report on the utilization of sick call in New York City jails. On the next slide, I'll discuss the definition and the requirements of sick call. In its minimum standards, the board defines sick call as an encounter between a person in custody and healthcare personnel for the purpose of assessing and/or treating a medical complaint. The minimum standards further specify that sick call is to be provided daily, Monday through Friday, in every facility and housing area operated by the Department of Correction. Additionally, the minimum standards require that people in custody be escorted by DOC staff for care at facility clinics operated by the Correctional Health Authority, which today is Correctional Health Services, within 24 hours of a request. When asked for their operational definitions of sick call, DOC responded that while the department has multiple policies related to the sick call process, there is no operational definition outlined in these policies. CHS shared that it does not have an operational definition of sick call, which is a DOC-driven process. Given these different perspectives, the board surveyed people in custody to understand, among other things, how they define sick call and their methods for accessing it. Excuse me. On the next slide, I'll discuss what we learned in this process. We learned that the top 3 reasons why people in custody use sick call was to 1, get care for a new medical issue, 2, address emergency medical issues, and 3, request medication. Requests were primarily made through the Correctional Health Services health triage line. However, a few people in custody also reported requesting sick call by speaking with a correctional officer and filling out a form. We also requested data from DOC and CHS to independently determine compliance with our minimum standard related to the provision and timeliness of sick call services. Based on our analysis of approximately 95,000 sick call requests between January 1st and December 31st, 2023, last calendar year, we found that 1, over a third of all requests resulted in people not being produced to the clinic. Of those produced, less than half were within 1 business day. Once produced, nearly all were seen by Correctional Health Services in their clinics. These findings were corroborated by a survey of 50 people in custody conducted by the board. The survey revealed 2 challenges in particular, including difficulty scheduling appointments through the correctional health triage line, and issues with being escorted by DOC to scheduled appointments. While some respondents reported that they had neutral feelings or that they were satisfied with the service, a majority reported general satisfaction. The board's analysis shows that 70% of these respondents were dissatisfied. Suggestions for improvement were focused on increased production, greater professionalism, and improved timeliness. Based on these findings, the board has several recommendations, which I'll discuss on the next slide. Our recommendations are as follows. 1, DOC should reduce its reliance on the Correctional Health Services health triage line and reestablish their own sick call process. We further recommend that the new process should A, include multiple defined pathways for people in custody to request sick call services virtually or in person. All requests should be documented in a DOC electronic database using an electronic form, and for each sick call request, DOC should collect and store, at minimum, the name of the person requesting sick call, the booking case number of this person, and the date and time of the sick call request. B, implement a dashboard to enable real-time scheduling of sick call appointments with Correctional Health Services. Using data collected and stored in its electronic database, DOC should develop a dashboard to be shared with Correctional Health Services to assist with scheduling sick call appointments. The dashboard should include, again, at minimum, the name of the person requesting sick call, the booking case number associated with the person, and the date and time of the request. PIC, people in custody, should be added to the list in the order in which they receive or they request sick call, The dashboard should also indicate which people in custody will not be escorted to the clinic, so Correctional Health Services can be aware of who to expect. C, track reasons for non-production. The department should also track reasons for non-production in its electronic database. These reasons should align with the reporting requirements specified in Local Law 132 for the year 2019, such as court, family visits, programming, barbershop, or production refusal. D, facilitate real-time monitoring of timeliness. For each sick call request, the department should document the clinic arrival time in its electronic database. This information should also be added to the dashboard to make Correctional Health Services aware of when people in custody arrive in a clinic. E, track healthcare encounter outcomes. For each sick call request, Correctional health services should be able to use the dashboard to note the date and time that people in custody are seen. If people are not seen, the dashboard should prompt correctional health services to enter the reason why. And these should be consistent with existing reporting to the board, such as instances where people in custody refuse treatment, leave without being seen, or correctional health services reschedules their encounter. F, track monthly performance metrics. At a minimum, these metrics should include the total number of people who request a sick call, the number and percentage of people who were produced to the clinic, and then for people who are not produced to the clinic, the number and percentage in each non-production category. Finally, the monthly performance metrics should also include the number and percentage of people who are seen by a healthcare provider. For people who are not seen, the number and percentage in each not seen category. Our second recommendation to DOC was for them to aim to improve the provision and timeliness of sick call to at least 95% within the next 6 months. Our last recommendation is that the department should evaluate people in custody satisfaction with sick call services. As soon as feasible, the department should implement patient satisfaction survey. These should be made available to people in custody through their tablets following a sick call request and inquire whether their healthcare concerns were addressed. On the next and last slide, I'll discuss our next steps. As part of our efforts to address the gaps in the sick call process, the board has engaged both the Department of Correction and Correctional Health Services. We held 2 productive meetings on October 1st and October 3rd to discuss an action plan for implementing the recommendations from our report. These conversations have been encouraging, and we are optimistic that a fully developed action plan will be finalized in the coming weeks. Once the action plan is in place, the board will closely monitor its implementation. We will track progress on key metrics, such as the provision and timeliness of care, to ensure that the recommended improvements are being made. This is just the beginning of our current efforts to enhance transparency, accountability, and overall service delivery in the sick call process. Looking ahead, we remain committed to ongoing evaluation and collaboration with all stakeholders to ensure that the sick call process meets the needs of those in custody. Thank you for your time and your attention today.
Any questions, Board Member Cohen?
Yeah, I thank you very much. That was very, very important topic, and appreciate the report. I have 2 questions. In the report, you did not distinguish by facility. I assume that there are great differences between facility and number of people who ask and transport to the clinics. Can you comment on that? And then I have another question after that.
We don't have that data on hand, but one of the reasons why we did not distinguish by facility is because we received call log data from the Department of Correction, and a person in custody can make a call in one facility, be moved to another facility, and then be seen in that facility. So it's difficult with the current data that we have to be able to effectively track the process from A to Z.
Okay. Well, I would hope in the next time you do the report that you figure out a way to know, because from my experience, different facilities function differently. If you could let us know that. Also, the population has decreased by 15% over the past 2 years. Is that reflected in the sick call numbers that you're saying?
We examined numbers from calendar year 2023, and so there was no base year for us to do a comparison of year over year changes in the population to determine whether the number of calls have changed over time. One thing to note, though, is that a person in custody can make multiple requests for sick call during their time of being incarcerated, and in doing that, it's difficult for us to determine any sort of rate or any sort of percent increase, simply because the needs might differ by individual. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that we are seeing increased demand on sick call processes, but it could really be an artifact of the population that we're serving.
You're saying that the multiple requests for the same clinic?
There could be multiple requests over someone's time incarcerated, right? So sick call is used for, routine medical complaint, and medication requests as well. So, presumably if someone needs to see a, correctional health services representative or healthcare personnel, they would make this request through the sick call line.
I would think those are all separate encounters, even if they're from the same person. And the fact that
They are separate encounters, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is you can't do a percentage increase from one year to the next because we have an aging population and a population in which the needs of people who have serious mental illnesses, for example, has been increasing slightly over time. And so as we have those two things combined, it's difficult for us to pinpoint which of those particular designations are causing any sort of increase. It could just be because we have an older and more ALN population, a sicker population.
thank you.
Thank you.
Before you go, you mentioned some recommendations to DOC around managing the encounters and appointments. Is that a recommendation that they are looking into, or is this something in conversations?
We had two really productive calls with DOC and CHS last week, October 1st, October 3rd. I believe they plan to give their own updates today, so I'll defer that question to them. But I will say that the conversations that we had were encouraging, and again, we are very optimistic that we will see a fully fleshed out action plan in the coming weeks.
You know what could be helpful, like a flow chart? Maybe this doesn't exist, but really understand what are those steps that it takes for someone to get an appointment, which is not happening. If there's something that could be developed.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. There is a flow chart in the report. It's on page 12, and it looks like this. Just for folks who are at home to see it, it's publicly available on our website. So this is based on a merge of data that came from the calls to people, the calls to the correctional health services line, as well as production data, which essentially tells us what the encounter outcome is. And putting those two very disparate data sets together, we were able to develop this process map. The thing about it is, again, this data is not detailed enough for us to know every single step. So I think the thing that we need to go forward is better data so that we can more effectively monitor this.
But in mind, the process map can help correctional health and DOC create a standardized process. Is that the intent? Yeah, I'm assuming that now that you have a process map, DOC and correctional health can actually try to figure out how to abide by it or create one that becomes the official one, right? Because it seems that there's more than one way to get to the clinic, but it's not clear if everyone knows how to get there. If the map is a process that you have developed now. Like you have a flow chart now that you're gonna investigate if they're following eventually, right?
Yeah, I think again that's the new evaluation and the ongoing evaluation process. Right now we're at the point where we've done the report, we have the recommendation. The next step is, we've engaged our stakeholders, which are, the Department of Correction and Correctional Health Services. And the next step would be to develop that action plan, which would then have the concrete steps of this is exactly what the process looks like. This is how the process will be implemented. And once we have clear definitions on each stage of the process, then we can go in and measure each one of them.
Thank you. Actually, it's very helpful to DOC.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Just
Yes, I have a question.
turn your mic up. Just leave it up, please.
Yeah, I have a question. I noticed that we are using recommendations, and one of the recommendations is the implemented dashboard, which I heartily agree with. Just wondering, what would be the ways of accessing that dashboard? In other words, could we build some type of data where PICs utilize their tablets, of which everyone should have access to request sick call Has that been talked about? I know I was at one of the meetings, I was not at the other meeting. And I know I'm probably looking and talking about something that is a coding nightmare, of which I am so grateful I'm not a computer programmer. But just wondering if we could utilize those tablets to implement a pathway for PICs to be able to access sick call. As the only board member sitting up here that has actually been through the sick call process, I have experienced in my past DOC acting as gatekeepers to who has access to sick call. And that has been kind of strange and crooked, and it actually does not afford us access to sick call. If I have to go to a correctional officer who is not trained in medical procedures and say, hey, I need to access sick call, and then that officer says to me, well, why? When I tell them why, they're like, nah, you don't need to go. I'm not calling.
Thank you
Yes,
so much, Vice Chair Skipper. I think that's a wonderful suggestion, and we've definitely spoken with the department about the various different ways in which they intend to operationalize this new process. And so I will defer that one also to the department so that they can share more insights on that, but it is absolutely a wonderful suggestion.
Thank you.
Yes, and, well, thank you. And I'd just like to remind board members, thank you for
Thank you.
the presentation, that DOC and CHS are going to be presenting. So reserve your questions or repeat your questions if you need a response from the department or CHS regarding sick call. I think that the work that's been done such far is great. And I think that the cooperation from both departments have been, very good in that regard to be responsive to the recommendations. But we'd like to hear from the departments as a board, and I would ask those questions to both parties. Now we'll move on to the added agenda item, and that's the deadlock at RMSC. And I'd like to ask, and forgive me if I get your name wrong, Justina Zawinski, is the R silent? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justina Rosinski, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and a PhD candidate at Yeshiva University in New York. I am also an adjunct professor at both Woods Ryler Graduate School of Social Work at Yeshiva University and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Since I received my MSW in 2010, I began working with people impacted by the criminal justice legal system. After graduating from social work, for 11 years, I worked in an outpatient substance abuse and mental health treatment program for people who were released from incarceration and mandated to treatment, first as a therapist and eventually as the clinical director. This job was very impactful on my life because I was able to see firsthand the struggles of people being released from incarceration. About a year ago, an opportunity presented itself to work on Rikers Island. I have read a lot about it and I knew it would be a challenge, but I figured that this is where I could be of most help. In December 2023, I started work as the clinical supervisor, associate director of mental health in the PACE and MO units at GRVC at Rikers Island. Even though I read so much about Rikers Island, I was unprepared for what I would see. Over the course of the next 9 months, I witnessed a widespread practice of something known as deadlocking, where patients who are severely mentally ill are locked in for weeks and weeks without access to medications. These individuals began to decompensate rapidly. Many would smear feces all over themselves and their cells. They would sit in their cells, almost catatonic, with flies and maggots and feces all over. DOC would often turn off the water in their cells to prevent them from flooding, which meant they could no longer flush their toilets, and the toilets would eventually overflow with sewage and spills on the floors. This is how these individuals woke up, went to sleep, and ate the meals that were delivered to them through a slot 3 times a day. The patients would scream and bang all day and night long, sounds that will haunt me forever. While working there, I learned that this practice of deadlocking is widely known and widely practiced. It was well established by the time I arrived last December, and throughout my time there, I saw more and more individuals subjected to it. Deadlocking is used as a punishment. The type of behavior or infraction that would trigger a deadlock varied depending on the day and the COs on duty, but it usually entailed the individual acting out in some way, typically by raising their voice, banging on the wall, or disrespecting the officers. Sometimes all it took was a person in custody looking at the CO in a weird way. While being there, I also saw a pattern. The patients that were locked in were the ones who were lower functioning and did not have the support in the community for anyone to advocate for them. I believe that many had cognitive and developmental disabilities. For example, I remember one patient who was locked in for months, and when I was finally able to get him out, he did not even know how to use a phone. That is how low functioning these individuals were. The officers knew not to document on paper who was deadlocked or why, so most of the time, very few people actually knew what was the underlying reason for the punishment. Still, the COs had a system of tagging the individuals who were deadlocked so that no one would let them out. For these individuals, the COs would place a white tag on their cell number in the control panel in the bubble that could remotely unlock any door in the unit. COs all knew not to unlock any door with this white tag, even if they didn't know why or how long the individual has been locked in. The weekends were the worst. I only worked Monday through Friday, but there were times that I would come in on a Monday and there were 15 lock-ins in my unit alone. The officers did not know why because they were not there on the weekend. I can only imagine what transpired. This deadlocking practice was extremely traumatic to witness for me and my fellow mental health staff, and also for other people in custody. When I could not, there were times when I could not sit in my office in the back of the unit because I smelled the feces or could not concentrate because a patient was banging and screaming. I could not believe what I saw. I have never seen anyone living in these types of conditions. The other more high-functioning patients on the floor would often complain about the banging and also about seeing their peers being locked in for long periods of time. They would even advocate on behalf of these individuals and try to get them out. They would get upset that these individuals were locked in and stated that this was inhumane. The mental health team was all distraught at this practice, and we did the best we could to advocate for these patients to be released, or at the very least to get their medications on an ad hoc basis. This practice was frequently discussed in our staff meetings, which included CHS staff from other units, and that is how I know this was also happening in the other PACE and MO units, because the other clinical supervisors were also upset about this practice. On some occasions, CHS staff were able to get patients out for a shower or a dose of medication here and there. Still, it depended on our persistent advocacy with sympathetic COs and much coordination, as if we were asking for an elaborate favor. Sometimes when the deadlocked patients got really bad, I would refer them to be hospitalized in Bellevue, so at least they could get some level of care and treatment. However, Bellevue only accepts patients for involuntary hospitalizations, therefore most would be rejected. Many of the patients in my unit were found unfit under 730 and were waiting to be placed at an OMH facility. But this would take months, and while they waited, they got worse and worse and suffered unimaginable trauma. To illustrate how deadlocking plays out and the impact it has on everyone, I'll share the story of one of my patients. This person suffered not only from a serious mental health issue, but also had a serious medical condition that requires strict adherence to daily medication. He came to my unit from another unit where he had already been deadlocked for God knows how long and has not received any medication, psychiatric or medical. By the time he arrived, he was non-functioning. He spent all day banging, screaming, smearing feces, and even tearing up his mattress. He was so skinny and frail, his pants, which were the smallest size they make, were falling off of him. I tried to talk to him and calm him down, but by this point, he already decompensated so badly that he was unable to communicate. Finally, after over a month in my unit, the mental health team was able to get him out. Once he came out, he was clearly extremely traumatized. He exhibited some odd behavior, like standing by my door and staring at me, but this did not bother me because I knew he was severely mentally ill and was extremely shell-shocked because he had not been out for so long. He did well that week. However, when I returned on Monday, I saw he was locked in. I asked the officers what had happened, and while they weren't so sure of the details, they mentioned that another female officer came onto the floor and she said he looked at her inappropriately and made her feel uncomfortable. There were no allegation of touching or physical contact or threats. She just thought that he was weird and she wanted him to be locked in. Fortunately, he was eventually able to move to an OMH facility and leave that toxic environment at Rikers. Months later, he returned from OMH, and I saw him again right before my last day. He was a completely different person. He had clearly been able to receive medication and treatment while he was in the hospital. I was able to have a coherent conversation with him, and he looked much healthier, having gained weight. He blamed himself for being locked in, which was devastating to hear. I assured him that it wasn't his fault. As I spoke to him, I kept thinking about what had been done to him and how this healthy version of him was who he should have been all along. After ending the session, I went into my office and cried. That was the moment that reaffirmed that leaving was the right decision for me. The more I stayed at Rikers, the more my mental health became impacted. I could not go home and separate. I thought about all those patients all the time, and I experienced anxiety before work because I didn't know what I was walking into. What upsets me the most is that these individuals are innocent. They have not been convicted of a crime yet, and even if they were, they are already being punished for their actions. We do not need to punish them anymore, and no human being deserves to be treated like this. I felt incredibly guilty about resigning because it felt like I was abandoning my patients. However, I made a promise to myself to continue fighting for them after I left. I knew I could make a more significant impact from the outside than while working there. And this is why I decided to go public with my experience, because the individuals I met in those units didn't have a voice to advocate for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes.
Board Member Vice Chair Skip.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your vulnerability and your bravery in stepping forward. Again, I will always fall back on the fact that I am the only one who has ever been incarcerated in Rikers Island. And I do remember the practice of deadlock, not in these circumstances, but basically it was used to keep the cell locked and we were out for appointments, court, medical, social services, so that no one would come in and flick the button and open the cell. These allegations are damning and they're horrible, especially to hear that they're being used punitively. You know, but we keep hearing that there is no solitary confinement on Rikers Island, and now what I'm hearing is different. I propose that we as a board really flesh this out and lean into this and dig further into this. And again, I cannot say thank you enough for bringing these up to light.
Board Member Cohen.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. It's a very sad story that you tell. I haven't seen month-long lock-ins, but I've seen lots and lots of punitive lock-ins in the facilities. And actually, every 5 days, and certainly now, the mayor suspends our rule 106B, which allows for unlimited lock-ins. Our rule says you can only lock in someone for 2 hours at a time, and this is not the policy anymore because the mayor, for some reason, thinks that there is an emergency which requires him to continue this. So I think we'll certainly use your material in our next attempt to have the commissioner change this request. I don't see there's any basis of it. And it's, as you said, very, very, very dangerous. People are driven crazy by being locked in for long periods of time and hurt themselves.
Any other questions before?
Thank
Board
you
Member
so
Ju-
much. I had a question. So deadlocking is akin to solitary confinement, right? A form of solitary confinement.
Yes.
So who determines the duration and frequency of deadlocking?
So It would be Department of Corrections. As mental health staff for CHS, we never recommend anybody to be deadlocked or locked in. So the mental health staff would try to advocate for the patient to be released, and sometimes they were, sometimes they were not. But we always advocated to have the person released
Okay.
because we understood the impact that it has on them.
Yes, Board Member Pitts.
Thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. I'm familiar with the term deadlock for the purpose of protecting the contents in the cell, as Board Member Skipper made mention. Not for what you're saying. For clarity for me, I need you to tell me if I'm understanding correctly. It sounds like people are getting deadlocked either for behavioral
Mhm.
problems or mental illness.
Mhm.
Are these two different?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
I don't understand why CHS does not provide medication to the mentally ill. How can DOC stop them from providing a medication to the mentally ill?
Like South Side, you mean? Because
Well, you
the
said
no,
The mentally ill are waiting for beds, I guess.
for OMH, because they're
Right.
found unfit.
And you said that they don't get
Yeah,
their medication.
because they're locked in. So CHS does provide medications, but the nurse on PACE comes on the unit, and on MO, they give it from the bubble, the medication. But if the patient is locked in, they're not being let out to take their medication.
Okay, because I can remember when medication was brought to cells too. So
Mhm.
there's no way to, if CHS sees that this is an issue,
Yeah,
they can't use an alternative method.
I mean, I'm not sure. I can't really speak for CHS. I think it's a policy. I'm not sure, but like I said, mental health and CHS, we tried our best with what we had to have these individuals come out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question, with regards to the PICs that are incarcerated for mental health,
Mhm.
well, the individuals in this unit, were they all remaining in DOC's custody, or were they being placed there to be transported out of that system into a state system?
So they were in DOC's custody, but they were waiting to go to OMH to be restored to fitness.
And how long of a time did they spend there waiting to be transferred out?
So it was a pretty long time. I would say about like 4 months.
For about a month?
4 months.
4 months?
Mhm.
I see.
I'd like to,
1 second, please. Yeah, I just want to give the opportunity.
Thank you, by the way.
You're welcome.
Excellent presentation, by the way.
okay.
Tremendously enlightening.
Judge, any comments or thoughts, Felipe? Okay, that being none, Vice Chair Skipper, order for you now.
So I just want to reiterate, hold on. I just want to reiterate that I heard you correctly, that this practice is being used punitively, that this is strictly a DOC-driven practice,
Yes.
and it's not with clinical permission.
No.
It is.
So we're always told by our supervisors, directors, that this is something that we do not agree with. We would never suggest to DOC to lock someone in.
Mhm.
And we advocate, we work with the officers to get the person out.
And it's being used punitively for something as minute as I don't like how they looked at me.
Yeah, or like if the individual, because of their mental illness, maybe stares inappropriately or, gets too close, or sometimes when they get angry and they might like threaten, make some threats, raise their voices.
But no physical action, like a threat is words, but no follow-up, no physical action, no, I'm gonna kill.
Well, I mean, in some,
To you with a
Right.
knife or whatever you call them things.
so in some instances, if there was a use of force, then yes, but the instances I'm talking about, there was no like use of force.
Okay.
And a lot of times we didn't even know why the patient was locked in, because if they came from another unit, they were already locked in there and it's different officers. So the mental health staff tried to find out as much information as we could.
And this practice was just continuing and perpetuate. So in other words, if one officer deadlocked someone and that tag was on the thing, and then that officer was relieved off duty, the tour was over, and then the next officer took on, they kind of like noticed that the tag was there and made no
Yeah,
inquiries as to why and just let it stand and so forth and so on.
yes.
Thank you.
Well, you said this is happening in the PACE units?
Mm-hmm. Not as frequent as the MO.
I do have a question, and this will be the last question. I know,
Mhm.
I appreciate you for your, your
Mhm.
bravery and your honesty as you indicate the facts as you know them. This might be far reaching, but, since you are now that advocate, I'd like to know your opinion on the capacity or capability of DOC and CHS to manage the mentally ill, severely mentally ill, in their custody.
So I think with CHS, we did the best we could. We were, with the officers, I don't know what else we could have done. But with DOC, maybe they need like more training on like what mental illness looks like, to see those signs and symptoms so that they see like, okay, this is a sign or symptom from this person's mental illness, and it's not just them reacting.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any other questions before? Thank you.
Thank you.
Updates and they can respond. That's why I put it in that order.
Okay.
We will now hear general updates from DOC. I don't know who will be presenting on behalf of the commissioner at this time, but please state your name and position.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is James Saunders, Deputy Commissioner of Health Affairs, Compliance and Quality. First, I'll address the board's recommendation from the sick call report. The department continues to be fully committed to providing people in custody with access to sick call. We're meeting with our partners at Correctional Health Services to discuss the board's recommendations and how we can achieve these shared goals. So as noted by Director Chaitu, we had 2 very productive meetings with the board last week to share our initial feedback. We're planning to have more internal discussions to figure out next steps, and we'll provide an update to the board soon. Now I'll share with you the department's work to support persons in custody with special needs and disabilities. The department recognizes the importance of equitable treatment under the law of persons in custody with disabilities. To meet our obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the New York State and New York City human rights laws, the ADA unit within the Division of Health Affairs has a designated staff member serving as the department's Disability Rights Coordinator, or DRC, for persons in custody. It's the coordinator's responsibility to ensure that policies, procedures, and practices relating to disability rights are aligned with current regulations and best practices, and that any access issues are promptly and equitably resolved. To that end, the Disability Rights Coordinator responds directly to persons in custody requesting a reasonable accommodation for an assistive device and coordinates with CHS, Correctional Health Services, who reviews the request, examines the requester, and makes the clinical determination on the appropriate assistive device that is needed. DOC's directive 3802R-B entitled Non-Discrimination of Incarcerated Individuals with Disabilities governs this very important work. Please take a moment to look at the screen behind you or in front of you. So these slides reflect the universe. Next slide. So these slides are going to reflect the universe of reasonable accommodation requests and the process by which the request for an assistive device begins and ends. So any person in custody may request a reasonable accommodation for an assistive device. And as you can see from this slide, there's been an increase in the number of requests year to year. Year to date, we've received 259 requests for reasonable accommodation, and of these, 26, next slide, 26 have been for hearing aids. This represents nearly 10% of all requests. Our review of historical data indicates that hearing aid requests represent about 10% of all requests year to year. Turning now, next slide, to the reasonable accommodation request process. So this gives you a pie chart review of the typical type of request for reasonable accommodation, anywhere from folks can ask for a brace, cane, continuous positive air pressure, that's a CPAP machine, crutches, dental requests, footwear, hearing aids, multiple devices, other, and a prosthetic device. Of those, you can see 10% represent teletype or video service. Vision represents the 42%, which is most of the types of requests that we receive for reasonable accommodation. So next slide, looking at the process. So the process may begin during intake screening if the person in custody self-identifies to DOC or to a correctional health provider as having a disability requiring an assistive device. Persons in custody may also request a reasonable accommodation for an assistive device at any time during their period of incarceration, separate and apart from their opportunity to do so during intake screening. Their options to initiate this process include calling the Disability Rights Coordinator directly using the tablet, phone, or house phone. There are no impediments. They can also contact the Office of Constituent and Grievance Services, otherwise known as OCGS, or by reaching out to DOC Social Services. Lastly, any person, including family members, significant others, attorneys, or advocates, may initiate the RA process, the reasonable accommodation process, on behalf of the person in custody via 311, CHS Patient Relations, through the CHS Health Triage line, also available on the tablet, or by the house phone, or reach out directly to DOC's OCGS, or even directly to the Health Affairs ADA Disability Rights Coordinator. The department's Disability Rights Coordinator, or their designee, it's a team of folks, then visits the person in custody after receiving that request. During this in-person visit, the Disability Rights Coordinator helps the individual to complete the reasonable accommodation paperwork, including completing a privacy release form, which allows limited but relevant medical information to be shared with the department related to the reasonable accommodation request. The DRC then coordinates with CHS to ensure that they have received formal notification that a person in custody will be requesting a reasonable accommodation. Thereafter, the Disability Rights Coordinator or another member of the ADA team visits the person in custody every 10 days to provide status updates until their request is resolved, one way or the other, either granted or denied. CHS conducts a medical evaluation and, if necessary, schedules a specialty appointment. DOC produces the person in custody, to the clinic or specialty appointment accordingly. CHS makes a clinical determination and communicates that determination to the department. If the reasonable accommodation is granted, the Disability Rights Coordinator will continue to visit with the person in custody every 10 days until the device is actually received. If the reasonable accommodation is denied, the person in custody is notified, given a reason why, so that they can appeal this decision, and they are provided with the necessary paperwork to do so. Finally, The department has posters throughout all facilities that highlight for the population the ways that they may reach out to the Disability Rights Coordinator for assistance with a reasonable accommodation request. Next slide, please. Following, next slide, please. This is a sample of the poster. It's in English and Spanish. I believe we also have them in English and French. They are in the law library and others social settings within the facilities. Next slide. So to promote wellness and health, as well as provide positive interactive programming for persons in custody, the NYC on Rikers Island hosted its first ever Silver Sneaker Olympics on September 16th and 17th. This two-day outdoor program featured low-impact activities for individuals in custody who are 50 years or older, and for those in custody who have physical disabilities. Next slide. The facility's population includes individuals with acute medical conditions that require infirmary-level care, and for those who have a disability that requires housing that is compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Thanks to the effort of DOC's Division of Programs and Community Partnerships and the Health Affairs Division, the initiative was a success. In closing, the department is committed to ensuring that persons in custody with disabilities or special needs are housed with the proper assistive devices and support in place to ensure their safety and well-being. We thank the board for the discussion today on this important topic. My colleagues and I are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Saunders?
Question?
I think, one second, please.
Oh.
I think we are in line of 3 areas of questioning, and that would be the utilization of sick call, special needs and hearing impairment, and the deadlock issue. Are you prepared to address all 3 lines of questions?
So I'm think I have enough support here to address any questions at this point.
Okay, so we'll proceed, board members. Board Member Cohen?
Regarding this, thank you very much. I really learned a lot from this presentation, and I've sometimes seen it in action, and I know that you try. Sometimes these things are very difficult. Prosthetics take a long time. There are conflicts between medicine and security on canes in cells, but I believe the department is committed to meeting ADA requirements. I have a specific disability I'd like you to discuss. I'm going to break it up into a series of questions. You can answer it best you can. Cognitive disability. What is the department's definition? How do you and when do you screen for it? What housing accommodations do you make? What kind of clinical support is provided?
I think I'm going to reserve that answer for my colleagues at CHS. The Department of Corrections does not diagnose. We're not in that business.
You don't do the screening?
We do conduct a screening. There are several screening or intake forms that we use. It's 2 forms on intake. Form 239M actually asks the question about disability and any sort of need for an assistive device. We also have the SCOC 330 form, which screens for the presence of suicidal ideation. And if the person does check off a certain number of boxes, a referral is made during that intake process to CHS. And just be reminded that all incoming folks are screened as part of that intake process by CHS, and that would include a mental health screening if so indicated. But I'll let them speak to that issue. Yes, sir.
One second. Board Member Pitts, I think that you.
I don't know if you can answer. Is it possible for medication to be brought to the person in custody cell? Is there anything that stops that from happening? Or is that not a question you can answer?
I'm going to reserve the answer for my colleagues in CHS because I've seen medication delivered to the unit. I've seen it delivered to the bubble. Medication has been distributed through the A post. So I have seen it. I've also seen instances where medication has been brought inside the unit. So it really varies. But because DOC is not the distributor of medication, I would reserve further comment to my colleagues at CHS.
Board Member Franco.
Thank you for your presentation. Again, it was very helpful and getting understanding of how we address, particular physical needs. But building on the question by Dr. Cohen, for example, there's a significant number of young people that we know in custody that have, independent, individualized educational plans, who are in the spectrum, who may have cognitive deficiencies. Are we meeting those needs with any kind of devices or support?
In terms of devices?
Yeah, there's devices that can help young people, regulate their emotions and behavior. There's devices to develop executive functioning skills, all of those things that actually are connected to young people who are struggling in those areas. And they actually have rights to be supported until age 21 by law.
So I know that many young people have access to the clinical services that are provided through CHS. They also have access to social workers that the department provides. There's also, I think you heard most recently, a program called Impact that also provides supportive services to folks who need it. So there are multiple, I don't want to use the term devices, but there are multiple opportunities to support people with behavioral and emotional problems.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking more about education. Particularly because I'm thinking about young people who have a right to education until age 21 by the federal law, and how are we rehabilitating them if we're not paying attention to education and their needs?
Thank you for that question. And I realize that the Department of Education provides those services, and I would defer to them to respond specifically to whether or not they have whether or not there's an individualized education program for certain individuals who need it.
Vice Chair Skip.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Saunders, but I'd like to speak specifically to the deadlock issue. What is it? What can you tell us? Because from what we're hearing, this is a DOC-driven policy, and we do have questions for CHS when they come in. But from the DOC point of view, what is deadlock? How are you using it? And why is it being used punitively?
All right, I'm going to defer to General Counsel James Conroy.
Good afternoon, board members. James Conroy, the General Counsel for the Department of Correction. So this issue really came to our attention in this meeting here and in an inquiry from a reporter last night. So we are looking into the allegations wholesale. So I don't have a lot of specifics with respect to that. I'll say this much: the term deadlocking, other than what the board members have referenced as a colloquial term for non-occupied cell closure, is not a common vernacular, based on our conversations just overnight and into this morning. So it is not something that is authorized by policy. It's not something that is at least even referred to commonly in what we're dealing with now. So until we further the investigation into the specific, allegations and circumstances that were articulated today, we can't comment too much further on it, but we'll happy to follow up with the board and any questions that we could bring back to a further meeting, we will certainly do so.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to be apprised of this further investigation, and I'd also like to know, where does this lead to? Because if it does come down that COs are using ultimate authority that is not within their purview, what happens then? Are they disciplined? Are they where could this lead?
It could lead to a number of places, obviously, discipline being one. But certainly we will keep the board apprised of, whatever we find out and look into it. And obviously, you're welcome to visit as well. We know that, so we will certainly keep you up to date on that. But again, given the timing of when we're really just becoming apprised of this as of last night, we don't have a lot of information. But we maintain, as we did always, is that solitary confinement has not been practiced and is not tolerated here since 2019. So that is what is appropriate in the department.
Our executive director has a question for you.
Yes.
Hi. I just separating from the term deadlocking, have you observed involuntary lock-ins?
There's procedures for that, obviously, as we spoke about, as Dr. Cohen mentioned, there's specific circumstances where allowed. The scope and breadth of what was articulated today is not something that we're, not something that we're seeing with the level of commonality and breadth that was described. So no, the answer to that is not
You,
not outside of, what's authorized by policy.
okay, because our staff has spoken with facility leadership regarding involuntary lock-ins at different facilities. And we will certainly continue to look into the issues at GRVC, but specifically with respect to RMSC and RNDC, we have spoken with facility leadership, and facility leadership has been responsive on some level at some of those facilities. So if you could provide an update with respect to command level orders that are given to staff on what the protocol is, what the policy is, and what it is not, that would be helpful for the board and the public.
Unequivocally, and if the board has these specific conversations and information, if that could be shared with the executive staff here as well, we'll collaborate together and again, work as far as reporting goes and addressing these issues.
Well, thank you. I'd like to state that, yeah, I'm speaking now. Give me 1 second, please. I'd like to state that this concern of deadlocking or by any other name that you want to call it has been a concern of mine since I've been on this board, specifically in Rosie's and Pace, specifically that's been witnessed by me and addressed with BOC staff and tour staff on the facility at that time. And the constant excuses or staffing or no medical staff and it's just endless. The discussions that go around why this deadlocking or involuntary lock-ins are occurring. I think, yes, I'd like to thank this article for an advocate to bringing it further to the light to this board and to the public. But I'd say in your investigation, I would like for that to be presented, what can be presented to this board and our executive team by our next board meeting in November.
Yes, sir. We'll endeavor to do that.
Okay, that would be very helpful. And Dr. Cohen, I have one other question, then I'll let you go. And that probably to
Yeah, so.
hold on 1 second
I'm sorry.
to Deputy Commissioner Saunders, unless you can answer, General Counsel.
Yeah.
You talked about your appeals process.
The appeals process is part of the reasonable accommodation
Yeah.
process.
Yes.
Yes.
Who does your appeal go to? You didn't cite who is the authority on that appeal and who makes that final determination on.
Understood. So the appeals process, let me start off by saying that approximately 9.3% of all of the reasonable accommodation requests are denied. They can be denied for a variety of reasons. It's about 9.3% of all requests are denied. And so individuals do have the right to appeal. They are given the documentation to submit. I think they have to file the appeal within 14 days. The appeal is sent to me in my role as Deputy Commissioner of Health Affairs. I have 10 days to review it, and then I share my determination with my colleagues from CHS. And that process basically goes back to the beginning where there's a review of the clinical determination and another outcome, either granted or denied.
Okay, and of that 9.3%, what, after that review process, what does it look like?
I don't have that data, but I'd be happy to follow up and get it to you.
All right, thank you very much. Board Member Cohen and Vice Chair.
Yes, for the General Counsel. The mayor has suspended 105B repeatedly since September 2021, almost 3 years next week, which says you don't have any rules regarding lockout. You can lock out people as long as you want, and for whatever reason you want, and there's no process for them appealing. Why the reason for that in the memorandum the mayor authors, and I hope it is based upon information provided by the department, is that there is a state of emergency on Rikers Island and you are unable to function if there are limits that the board placed on your ability to use lockout. Could you explain why you're continuing to ask for this?
So just as a general matter, the board knows I'm still, 8 weeks into the position, so I'm not completely apprised of the entire history going back to 3 years ago. I will say this much.
It's changed in 3 years. It's been there every.
No, I understand, but I mean, the implementation of it initially. And what I'll say is this, that there is policy with respect to lock-in procedures. They are, there has to be certain criteria. It does state in the policy that it is a 2 hours absent other exigent circumstances, and there's a list of it. Again, I don't have it memorized, but there is policy which we could share with the board on that. So it's not, should not be categorized as kind of a willy-nilly, just we're doing it. That's not the case. There is procedures, policies, circumstances that govern and dictate when lock-ins could be utilized, and anything beyond that is not something that this agency or this commissioner will tolerate. So again, that's why we're representing in these circumstances. We become aware of it. It will be looked into and investigated, and we will be able to report back on those
The
circumstances.
state of emergency?
I will have a better answer for you the next time, because again, I was not part of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vice Chair Skip and then Board Member Ramos.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanders, in going back to the request for reasonable accommodations, and you say that people do have the right to appeal. And did I hear you correctly to say that the appeal comes to you?
It does.
Um,
It comes to me for review. I mean, obviously, I'm not the clinical provider, so I will review it and then share it with my colleagues from CHS so that they can perform the clinical evaluation.
so then it
That-
does go to CHS, so
It
you're just
definitely-
not rendering these decisions?
I am
Because I was
not,
gonna ask, do you have medical training or anything like that?
I'm an attorney. I'm not a medical provider in any way, shape, or form. And so I
Thank you for your honesty, sir.
do not arbitrarily and capriciously deny any appeal.
Mhm.
Those appeals basically circle back to the beginning. If you look at the flow chart, it goes back to the beginning
Mhm.
where CHS will perform a clinical evaluation of that request
Mhm.
and then either grant it or deny it. Now, there could be security reasons associated with the type of request as well. And so you may have a security layer there that would also impact the ability to either grant or deny the request.
I would be interested in learning what those security reasons are that would deny someone a reasonable accommodation for handicap, disability, or anything like that. What could possibly be a security concern?
So one example is folks may come into custody with a metal cane. That's not allowed inside the facilities. And so we would replace that cane with a wooden one,
Okay,
right? Or there may be some other issue. Maybe a person has, they request for a sling and yet they have no arm injury that doesn't, that warrant it. And so
but that's not a security concern.
could
You
be where you-
spoke of security
you,
concerns.
well, there's a lot, you may be able to, secret contraband inside a sling or some other device.
Excuse
So
me, I'm gonna intervene now. I really would not like to talk, too much about security concerns right now
Okay.
in this forum. Board Member Ramos?
Yes, Commissioner, I know you gave a presentation there on the services of special needs, but I can't wait to hear what your procedures and practices in dealing with the hearing impaired.
So we have approximately 10% of the population that have requested hearing aids or hearing assistive devices. I think it's about 26 or so this calendar year. But historically speaking, assistive devices for the hearing impaired represent about 10% of all the requests received.
I'm talking about, and I'm referring to those that do not need devices, that are completely impaired, completely deaf.
Understood. So with respect to folks who are completely deaf, We do have devices located in every facility. We have a teletypewriter device that permits them to communicate with their loved ones or advocates. We also have the VRS devices, the video relay service, where they can use, those who use American Sign Language can use these devices. They're videotaped. It's the closest thing to having a natural conversation for folks who are hearing impaired. So all of our facilities have at least one device. 50% of them have two devices in place.
What's your procedure in identifying these people who are with special needs?
So those individuals are flagged, and
How?
so that there should be an indicator on their floor locator card as to whether or not they are hearing impaired. And again, not everyone who comes into our custody self-identifies as having a disability. And so, but for those folks who do, that information is flagged, and it's probably, and I'm going to say it's an IAS as well, with my operations folks. It's in our inmate information system as well, where we will have certain flags in place indicating that they have a disability or need a reasonable accommodation. So
You still haven't told me how you identify those people who come in and cannot communicate.
So we rely on our colleagues at CHS to identify.
They don't come to CHS first. They come into the Department of Correction first.
That's correct.
Exactly.
So
How
again,
do we identify them?
So as part of the intake screening process,
How do we do that?
Form 239 asks.
No form, forget about forms.
They-
They
they
can't,
will-
they're not filling forms out. If they can't hear,
Right.
they can't follow instructions, they can't fill out papers.
Correct. So the intake officer is going to note that on the intake form and share that information.
What procedures does that intake officer use in order to identify that particular person?
So part of the conversation is that officer asking the individual whether or not they have a disability.
The
And
person can't hear.
if that person can't hear and otherwise communicates using sign language, or perhaps the officer gives them a pen and a paper, and they'll write down, they'll communicate via writing, that's one form of exchange of that information, right? Where the person self-identifies, gives it to the officer, then the officer documents it on the intake form, and then shares that information in our systems and with our colleagues.
At this point, Board Member Ramos, would it be fair for you to ask for the procedure to address your concern for the hearing impaired?
But I've been trying to ask that for the last several questions.
Okay, so
So we do have a policy. It's very clear, laid out in the policy. It's the directive entitled Non-Discrimination of Incarcerated Individuals with Disability. It governs hearing impaired as well as all other disabilities. And we'd be happy to send you a copy of.
At this particular point, I think we need to be able to discuss this a little further, because the fact is that you're not answering my question. We're playing around. We're giving, answers in order to be able to satisfy what you do. You have not been able to tell me exactly what your procedure is. If a person comes in your intake process and he's facing the wall, what does the officer do in order to be able to get that person's attention without pushing him or getting into a confusion and even placing their hands on them in order for that person to listen to what he's trying to say?
So I don't have that level of detail. I'd be happy to follow up on that line of questioning.
Would you please? I'm interested in that.
Okay.
And the fact that, it's really a sensitive thing.
Mhm.
And remember the years when people used to come in and used to be tremendously abused by the department personnel, because the fact is that they did not move when they were asked to move. And all
Understood.
they had to do was to present a piece of paper and say, "Can you read this?" And the person would move yes or no. Or even look at them and speak to them without putting their hands in front of their face so that they can read their lips. I like to find out what your procedure is and identifying that. And I don't want no abadabbas because I'm very well versed in that particular subject.
Good afternoon, board. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Allison Pace, and I'm the Associate Commissioner of Facility Operations. And I also oversee the new admissions process coming into EMTC and Rosensinger facility. So our intake process starts at the court. Once individuals are turned over into our care and custody from PD after arraignment, some of that information is also provided to us at that point. So if, once it's flagged from the court perspective, and we have that information, we follow that through with making sure that the staff are notified, and that once we get into the new admission process and they are actually at the facility, we are working in conjunction with our partners at CHS to ensure that we are providing the adequate level of care and service to the
Thank you.
individual. Yes, sir.
Can you please sit down,
Okay.
discuss it, and come back with your with your procedures and how you identify people that are hearing impaired and how you classify them and how then you place them
Yes.
and where you place them?
Yes, sir.
Board Member Ramos, I would like to maybe give them an opportunity to review that process over to our next board meeting.
Yeah,
Because-
that's what I'm requesting.
Yes.
Okay.
So unless you're prepared to address that with policy and procedures that are in place to address the board member's question, we'd like to give you an opportunity to present that at our next board meeting.
The opportunity is very much appreciated, and we will sit and we will go through the process because I want to ensure that you have adequate information, appropriate information, because those in our care and our custody are important and it matters. So I'm definitely not going to negate what you say because it matters and it matters to me. I oversee the process of new admission, and there's sleepless nights and busy days ensuring that we are doing everything for those coming into our care and custody to provide them the services that they need and require. Okay, so I will.
I'd also like to ask for a copy of the policy directive that is passed out to your officers and intake staff, which just delineate every step of the process, please.
Okay, Mr. Fair.
Yes. So thank you. Any other questions for the department? Board Member Jude.
Thank you. I had a question in terms of, for those PICs who are non-ambulatory, how do you think you're faring in terms of providing them services?
So we have a special unit at the North Infirmary Command set up specifically for non-ambulatory persons in custody.
Mhm.
I think we've got about, we have a number of individuals. Last I checked, about 37 individuals who are in wheelchairs,
Right.
wheelchair bound. And so there is a special unit that is ADA compliant that they would be housed in. And that would also go for other individuals who may need a special sort of environment that is ADA compliant. It's,
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the department? Well, thank you for your detailed responses and discussion, Commissioner. I'd like to ask CHS for updates, their plans for implementation of the board's recommendations regarding the utilization of sick call in New York City jails. And also, I'm sure there'll be questions regarding deadlock and mental health.
Sure. Hi, I'm Patsy Yang, Senior Vice President of Health and Hospitals for Correctional Health Services. My piece will be fairly brief, just in terms of the sick call report. As everyone's noted, we had some good conversations last week with the board and the department. Much of the board's report focuses on the health triage line, which Correctional Health Services initiated on its own 5 years ago, as one way for patients to initiate and bring their requests and their concerns to us. Board Member Franco, your question about process and flow, the bulk of the volume of visits that we have with our patients are those that we have requested for patients to be brought to us. They're already, we know of them, we are engaging them in care. This is a separate question of how patients can initiate contact with us. Vice Chair, as you noted, there's a house phone. There's also the tablets. They can use the tablets now to call our health triage line. We created this 5 years ago, as Dr. Cohen knows, as another way for patients to connect with us directly, which is not to say that it obviates the other pathways that may exist, which I think was the focus of the report. I am just here to affirm that Correctional Health Services remains absolutely committed to working with the department and the board to make sure that everybody who needs care gets that care. And that's really it. I know the real presentation here is going to be our Chiefs of Service for Medicine and Mental Health, Doctors Rosner and Odhanchar are here right behind me, and one of whom you probably know, and the other one you are going to get introduced to now. So let me just back off.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Zach Rosner, CHS, Chief of Service for Medicine. I think we have some slides that we are pulling up right now. So just going to briefly go through some points, some of which are reiteration of some of the workflow that Mr. Saunders discussed. But we're going to talk through some of the services for patients with hearing and vision impairment. And Dr. Atanakar is going to be speaking about intellectual and developmental disabilities. Next slide.
If you could just speak up just a little, please.
Thank you. I have a tendency. So just to briefly talk through, Correctional Health Services at the point of medical intake does a full history and physical. That includes specific questions about whether patients need hearing devices or glasses, and if they have those devices with them. That's asked by nurses, and then that's followed up by physicians who do additional review of those answers and then do a physical exam. We offer a variety of specialty services, which can be initiated at admission to the jails or referred at any other point during someone's time in custody. We pretty regularly do expedite appointments for patients who have lost their hearing aids, often during the arrest process. There are also routine screenings that occur for patients with chronic illness. And then we have advanced care through our partners at Bellevue and Elmhurst Hospital. So beyond optometry, which is an internal service, we do coordinate for ophthalmology as well. Patients are, as mentioned, patients who require an assistive device are placed on a list that goes to DOC on a regular automated daily basis. And then there's other coordination with the Disability Rights Coordinator with DOC in terms of referrals coming in. Next slide. Over the course of 2024, so far, CHS has provided over 1,600 pairs of glasses, over 160 hearing aids purchased in 2023. Obviously, there's turnover and short lengths of stay, and so some of these devices are ordered before the patients may leave in the process. CHS does have a contract for sign language interpreters, which can be arranged for scheduled appointments with specialists and medical visits in the clinics in advance. There are also additional specialized teams within CHS, including the Medically Complex Care Service and Elder Services, which advocate on behalf of individual patients to do more complicated care coordination and advocate for those patients both in the jails and at the point of discharge. And then, as mentioned before, for patients whose impairments can't be corrected fully to navigate the jails, there's the disability unit in the infirmary, which is ADA compliant, and is the infirmary annex is the only ADA compliant space on Rikers Island right now. So I'll hand it over for the.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joe Tanakar. Thank you for the opportunity to come speak today. I am the chief of the mental health service. I'm a psychiatrist. I've been working with CHS since 2017 and recently took on this role as chief of service. And so, I'm fortunate to be privileged with the ability to work with our mental health, with our patients, and ensuring excellence of care with the provision of mental health services. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about the services we provide with regard to those who have neurocognitive disabilities, as well as access to those. If we could go to the next slide. So just to begin, we are really, I want to talk a little bit about what do I mean when I'm referring to those with cognitive impairments. And, we're a very clinically driven service. We rely very heavily on the DSM-5 diagnoses. And so when I'm talking about cognitively impaired individuals, those I'm referring to within the population generally, most commonly are those with intellectual disabilities, those with autism spectrum disorders, and those with learning disorders. But additionally, we also have those with cognitive disabilities on the other end. So these neurodevelopmental disorders that I just mentioned are those that happen from a very young age. In order to diagnose people with these, they have to have had them since their youth. Those with neurocognitive disorders on the other side often develop these at the old age. So things that are often commonly known as dementia, major neurocognitive disorder, mild neurocognitive disorder, and these can be caused by a variety of things, including Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease. And we really do, take care to stick to the clinical criteria when diagnosing these, because, we really want to ensure that we're being accurate with our clinical thinking about individuals. Next slide, please. And so one of the goals of our service is to really make sure that nobody ever falls through the cracks when it comes to identifying those with cognitive disabilities, cognitive impairment. We do have a robust system of identification. Everybody who is arrested and brought to Rikers Island has a medical intake screening that includes screening for those who receive services through the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Additionally, within the medical intakes, people are screened, and if there's any concern for intellectual disabilities or cognitive impairment, patients are referred to the mental health service to be seen, regardless of the presence of other symptoms of mental illness. Similarly, we often receive input from outside entities, including the OPWDD directly reaches out to us to let us know that one of the people that they are familiar with are in custody. Legal teams often will reach out to us to make us aware, and other community collaterals will reach out to us, including concerned family members or others from the community who are familiar with that patient. Those who are on the mental health service that we see regularly who have not been identified as having an intellectual disability or cognitive disorder are seen upon intake when mental health staff first establish care with them, but also at every encounter, we review and try to ensure that no patient is slipping through the cracks and consider the possibility of whether or not they may have an intellectual disability. We also will review psyches when available, as well as special education records. We are sometimes obtained, individualized education plans, and other collateral resources. And, this is something that we really do try to take an individualized approach with every patient regarding the services and the monitoring care. If we could go to the next slide, please. So, we have, in response to just in the past, before I went into this role, developed specialized units that help to ensure that patients with these special needs can be more closely monitored. And specifically, we have 2 PACE units that we will often place patients on. I'm sure you're familiar with our model of PACE units. These are the highest level of mental health care units that we have on Rikers Island. And we have a specific neurodevelopmental PACE unit in GRVC on 8A That is a smaller census unit to help reduce stimulation for those patients with neurocognitive disorders, as well as a smaller dorm unit in RNDC that we will often transfer patients to. Similarly, patients who have comorbid medical illnesses with neurocognitive disorders will often be transferred to NIC on the PACE NIC infirmary unit for closer monitoring and care. Anybody who is on the mental health service, but specifically those with neurocognitive disorders, intellectual disabilities, receive treatment from on an individualized basis. They see mental health clinicians regularly, psychiatric providers when medication is indicated for patients. Ongoing groups on the therapeutic housing units that are run by a variety of staff, including the treatment aides. On the mental health treatment therapeutic units, staff round at least daily to check in with everybody. We also have creative arts therapy services that are given to patients on our therapeutic housing units.
Good stuff, good stuff.
Yeah. And in addition to the care that we provide on Rikers Island to patients, our social work service really does, I think, a very robust job with ensuring that patients are connected to discharge services. So, I think these people who are connected to OPWDD are entitled to a greater level of services. So, they really work to coordinate AOT when indicated, housing, and just ensure that people don't fall through the cracks once they're released from DOC custody. So that's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
That's a lot.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
But yeah,
1 second, please. Are you finished your presentation?
I think we're done, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I had a question.
Vice Chair, Skip?
Yes.
you?
yes, thank you for that helpful response. But let's go to this deadlock issue. Please tell me, what is the policy of cell medication on PACE and MO units? That's my first question.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a real challenge throughout the years because, I think the general model is that patients are brought to a specific place to receive medications. That has been for organizational purposes, safety purposes, making sure that we can monitor very closely that patients are taking their medications when given, safety of staff as well. We do escalate when there are situations to consider the possibility of cell-side medications, but it's really not optimal, and it's really, it can be very challenging to do that. But when those situations arise, we do try to escalate and problem solve. With that said, CHS has a very strict policy when it comes to therapeutic seclusion. We do not, under any circumstances, allow therapeutic seclusion, and those patients who require therapeutic seclusion are assessed and evaluated and escalated and transferred to a higher level of care if need be, the hospital.
Okay, thank you for that. So what about this deadlock situation? Has this been going on? Has your staff been breaching this or bringing this up in staff meetings? Because I keep hearing that it's been talked about, and I'm sure it's going through the channels.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the term since I started in 2017 when I was working at GRVC, and I do, know that we have really tried to work with our DSC colleagues in ensuring that patients are escalated when this does come up. We have developed specific monitoring systems within CHS even to try to identify when patients are deadlocked for consecutive periods, and then we, within central management, try to, in addition to facility leadership, escalate those cases.
So why has no one raised this issue above what happened last night with a Daily News article? If you said that you are aware of this deadlock situation and the fact that it's used punitively against clinical requirement, why has no one under your employ pushed this off and out? Why has it stayed internal and we have to hear about it now?
I'm going to defer to my colleague, Dr. Sabeti, to take that one.
Sure. Hi, Stephen Subedi. I'm Chief Medical Officer for Correctional Health Services. I think to your point, like Dr. Otanakar said, we do escalate and have pathways when we identify individuals where there's barriers to access. The key is first to work on the units and work locally with multidisciplinary staff. That's nursing, that's pharmacy, there's mental health, that's DOC, to try to find a solution. And then we escalate as appropriate through the system. How the nature of the escalation and how it occurs depends on the clinical situation at hand, so it really differs. One of the challenges is having insight kind of generally about what's going on. So like Dr. Otanakar said, we're working on systems to help essentially identify how this is happening. So I think we may be aware of a practice to some degree, but I think to build systems to help kind of monitor and then address it from a systems perspective is something that we're working on.
That's not what I'm asking. This is being used as a punitive measure. And from what I know, on the PACE and MO units, you have staff present 24 hours a day. Am I right? Staff is present. Well, maybe not 24 hours, but staff is present on these units. So if someone is deadlocked for punitive reasons, what has been your response and why has this not been pushed up and out?
Sure. So just to be clear, for us to be pushing it up and out, we have to be aware of what's happening. We may not always be aware when this is occurring. I think, as was said earlier in the testimony, that our PACE units, where we're on staff about 16 hours a day, we're on 24/7 anywhere. There's a lower occurrence of this, generally speaking. And so I think the issue is having insight to areas where we're not on site as much. And again, we can work with the department and the board about coming up with systems to have visibility into those areas.
Please, and I'd like to see your policy and procedure in writing for cell-side medication, because if you're coming into these units and someone is supposed to get medication, but instead they are deadlocked, for want of a better word, and you cannot give them medication, where are you listing this down and notifying the powers that be that this person was supposed to get this medication, but I could not get this person to be able to come to the bubble to give them this medication? Where does that go after that?
So it depends on the nature and the situation at hand. Some individuals, and for not taking medication for any reason, right, whether it's this situation or another one, then the team follows up with them to try to encourage them to either accept the medication or work with DOC so there's access. And then how that's documented depends on the situation. So it's generally in the medical record when this occurs. And so that's something that we document. And then there's other systems from there.
So it'll be in the medical record. So we get names of individuals that have gone through this deadlock process. And we actually, if we can, look at their medical records. What you're telling me is that CHS has documented every time they tried to give this person medication and was denied access by DOC.
It again depends on the situation, but it could be there, correct?
I'd like to see that.
Sure.
Okay, Board Member Jude, then Board Member Pitts, and then Board Member Franklin.
Yes, you had mentioned utilizing psyches. Could you elaborate on that? Because I'm not familiar with what that is.
Yeah, Psyches is a great system, statewide system that I learned about when I moved to New York. But it is basically a resource in which anybody who's been hospitalized, who's been prescribed psychiatric medications, who's been diagnosed with mental illness, they go into a database. And when a patient gives consent to us, we can pull from that database a list of previous diagnoses, previous hospitalizations. And it can be really helpful for just from a background standpoint, diagnostically, to figure out their history. I think it's a supplement to kind of other information that we use to diagnose people.
It's good to have historical data.
Yeah.
Relates to mental health.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm just stuck on this medication and delivery of it. We are aware that people in custody are dead. The person has mental illness and requires medication to be stable. For whatever reason, they're not brought to the aid station or to the bubble to get the medication. They have not, to your knowledge, they have not refused medication. Can medical staff provide them medication at their cell? in those instances? They've not refused it.
So I think it depends on the situation. So the first thing that we do when someone is not receiving their medication, whatever the reason, is to go back to the cell side. This is the general process or expectation, and try to understand why they weren't coming out of their cell or didn't accept the medication. And then the intervention then depends from there. Bringing medications to the cell side, I think as mentioned before, can be operationally challenging. It can be challenging from a security standpoint. The door needs to be opened for the medication to be passed, right? I think that's an important piece there too. So, we can do it at times, but I think to operationalize it across the board is challenging in our current setting with our current infrastructure. Each unit also looks very different. Each door looks very different on all these units. So I think we just have to separate what is a systemic intervention versus what we're able to do in reality on these very different units in very different clinical situations. So we do flex, that's the whole PACE model, to flex to the patient when we can, but there are limitations when you're working in a jail setting.
Thank you.
Sure.
But you're
Hold
clearly
on 1 second, 1
documenting
second,
this.
please. 1 second, please. Board Member Franco.
Kind of following up as, using your term, as the only other board member who actually had worked as a clinician in 2 different states and plenty of facilities. It's not unusual to have the challenge of not having people produce to do your work. And you guys have that all the time, or not even actually being able to see them to adjust medication. And in every place that I've been, that's an issue. Even early in my career, there would be an escalating process of how to communicate that. Could you help us understand that? I mean, I remember being, even as an extern or even as an early psychologist, being able to talk to the supervisor, being able to actually address it at the following level.
Yeah.
Even to the level that I remember having meetings with directors of institutions, even though I was a clinician, just to present the frustration of not being able to provide the services that I had to. So what is the process?
Sure. So just in terms of clinical escalation, if there are individuals who may be decompensating because of care issues, we do escalate up to the, our therapeutic housing unit pathway. So there's mental observation and PACE units. Right. So
just
just,
escalation internally, you as a clinician, the escalation that you need to have with the managing agency of the institution, so that you can actually do your job and fulfill your responsibility.
So yes, so there's escalation pathways within the building that follow within our clinical supervision, and then that also go to operations within CHS, and then also to DOC, local DOC, and then pathways to go outside of the building too. So again, depends on the clinical situation. And then when someone needs to go to the hospital, that's kind of escalated right away, and individuals are moved and go to the hospital.
So is there escalation process that you could share with us? I mean, as a clinician, do I write a note first? Do I go to my supervisor? From the supervisors, the conversation with the warden? I mean, it would be really helpful to understand
absolutely.
how is it that we communicate? I mean, both of you communicate to elevate issues when you're actually not being able to provide the services you have to provide.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how is it? Like if I'm at the PACE unit, early in my career, I haven't seen my client in a month. What I do?
So, a month is a very long time. So,
we hear situations where that may happen.
Yeah, so I think we can look into how certain policies and procedures may or may not, I don't want to say be followed, but are challenges or challenging to follow up with on the PACE units. But I think the escalation would first be to our unit chiefs who are in the building. Then that can go to operations within the building, and then pathways directly to central management and to DOC. I think ultimately, again, the key is making sure on our end that the clinical needs are met of an individual. And if we are not able to access them, going through the pathways of the department to ensure that we have access.
I mean, if you could share with the board, I would really.
Sure, we're happy to do that. Absolutely.
So if you could share this information with the board and also share how many times that this has happened and how this procedure is followed step by step. So in other words, if you have clinical staff who are on site to give medication, twice or 3 times a day, I need to know how many people during these medication times were not allowed to access their medication. I also need to know, was it involuntary or was it because of involuntary whatevers? Was they not produced? They couldn't come to the bubble? Why couldn't they come to the bubble? And then what steps are followed? You should have a clear policy and procedure which tells us this and also delineates the steps that you take to address this, because you guys are the clinicians on the unit. You alone know that XYZ needs their medication and why they need their medication. DO staff should not even have privy to that knowledge. So if you go in there and you can't give medication, you should be in a position to ask why, and it should also be fully documented. I want to know how many times people were not given their medication and why.
So we can look at to get that information for you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll make a, no, go ahead.
Joseph, I'm sorry that I forgot your last name. Welcome to the work.
Thank you.
I ask this question usually of everyone in this space. And I was very glad a few years back you guys hired a psychiatrist with a specialization in young adults and adolescent psychiatry. I know actually he left. I think he's actually having a cool job in Australia somewhere else. Do you have the capacity with that expertise again in your team?
Yeah,
With adolescent psychiatry with expertise in young adults?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So unfortunately, Dr. Tedeschi had to move to Australia due to some non-visa issues, basically. We were very fortunately recently to have been able to recruit a psychiatrist who completed her forensic psychiatry fellowship through Yale, and prior to that had completed a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And so she recently started at RNDC several months ago. She's currently part-time, but actually planning to move to closer to full-time with us. So she has a lot of expertise in child and
Looking forward to being here. And then you spent some time talking about how you use data and history to create a diagnosis of through intake. And you mentioned a few places. I mean, and this is going to be more comments than questions, so sorry about that. Like OPWDD, which is a very important state agency, which I work closely with, serve a very, 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 very small percentage of people with disabilities. And actually, historically, and this is openly known in the courts, tend to refuse young people or anyone with behavior issues. So you're getting a very biased, very small perspective from that. You mentioned psychics, which I think is actually a great resource. I mean, I love it. You can get the history of treatment and encounters. But again, it's not unusual for the people who are in Rikers, that are minority, that are poor, not having had access to mental health in the right way. I would encourage you to really pay attention to District 79 and the information from DOE, because there should be more universally available. Again, I mean, I think we know as a fact that majority of the folks that we serve in Rikers have had issues with mental health, disabilities, and trauma. And I think it bears on you and all of us that we identify and address them as quickly as we can.
Thank you for that. And just in line with what you're saying, OPWDD, as of yesterday, we're connected with 30 patients within CHS reach. But we actually have, as of yesterday, 54 patients diagnosed with intellectual disabilities. So we're capturing a much broader pool of individuals than just OPWDD.
And the last one, I hear more and more about the connection between head injury and abuse in childhood and delinquency. I mean, so I'm hoping that you pay attention to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Last one for you, Vice Chair.
Okay, I'm just such a pain, I understand.
It's
You,
not a
sir.
pain.
You, sir. Yes, you.
Oh.
I know I asked for a specific report delineating all the steps of this procedure, but in that report, I would also like to know that when we're talking about the delivery of medications, are we talking about strictly psych medications, but also medical medications? So are people being denied medication via deadlock? Are these medications psych meds, or are they also medical meds? Like it could be HIV medication, diabetes medication, high blood pressure medication, so forth and so on.
So I assume, given that our patients are both on medical and mental health meds, it could be either. And that's why we have monitoring processes and escalation processes that are specific to the medication and the risk.
But I would like to have that differentiated and put into this nice, helpful report you're going to give us.
Sure, we can look into that.
Thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
No problem.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm finished.
thank you. Before you leave, I just had a couple of observations. There's no dispute that Ms. Zawinski was employed by CHS for a period.
Correct.
Okay, and your discussions today, I've heard no opposition to her testimony today and her reports in the Daily News,
Opposition? Sorry, can you?
or any opposing some of the
No,
comments she stated.
no.
Okay. So I'll ask this question that I asked Ms. Zawinski. Do you feel that CHS and the department has the capacity to deal with severely mentally ill
Well,
PLCs?
Yes, I think that the compliance rates on our PACE units overall, then we're talking about these individual issues, are very high and demonstrated success rate in the, generally speaking, we look at it in the 80s. So the system and the programs that we developed have been helping our patients and I think are integral to the care that our patients received. I think that doesn't mean we still don't have to look into some of the barriers to care and access that come up. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think both can be true, and we look forward to working with the board and the department on how to, improve access.
Yeah, and that being said, further, I know counsel for the department talked about an investigation and review. I would like that to be joint with CHS, the department, in cooperation with our BOC team, so that we can have a comprehensive report prior to our next board meeting.
Sure, we're happy to work with the department as we always do.
Chair, I would also like to include, why is it that it takes so long for the Department of Correction to get rid of to get the people that are in custody that are supposed to be transferred out of Rikers Island into the state facilities?
Yes, that's one of the issues we will bring up, because there's a number of factors impacting the department that we as a board should address at some point.
The other thing that was concerning about those people being left there and not being transferred out.
I understand.
And if they're not being transferred out, they're not being taken care of.
Yeah, I understand. And we can address that in another board meeting, and I will note that to be at the top of one of the agenda items. That being said, I just wanted to, address the vice chair with respect to, unfortunately being incarcerated at Rikers. Speaking as chair of this board, and thank God I have not had the unfortunate experience to be locked up at Rikers Island. But I can tell you that from my understanding of each and every board member here, they take this matter very serious, regardless. And there's a wide range of experiences on this board, from former deputy commissioners, from training officers, youth facilities, you don't call them corrections, but there's not much of a difference. I can tell you that. So that the experience here is wide, and each board member brings their experience and ability to this board and table. And I'll leave it at that. But CHS, thank you. And this is Dr. Joseph. How do you pronounce your last name?
Otanakar.
Yes. Yeah, at some point, if I would like to have you back to get more in detail, Patsy, if you can definitely bring it back, because this mental health issue is is probably one of the biggest issues confronting the department. And is a big concern to this board. And you just running off your experience, and with the department, we can learn a lot and make policies that may be more helpful for department and you to be more effective in what you're doing. So that I thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent presentations. Excellent.
So
presentation.
CHS, if there's no other questions, yeah, I think that we can say that you're done.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
your
Thank you.
observation, Chair Sampson, about the diversity.
You're quite welcome. COBA, we now have a turn to COBA to share staff concerns, comments regarding the utilization of sick call in New York City jails.
Oh, boy.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Antoinette Anderson. I am the third Vice President of the Corrections Officers Benevolent Association. For the last 2 hours, I have sat and listened to a lot of testimony, a lot of questions that was asked, and a lot of questions that could not be answered. So the first topic I want to speak on is the sick call. As a correction officer that worked in the housing areas as well as the mentally ill housing areas and the clinic, I want to say a few things. The process of sick call goes as this. When we're in a housing area, we put out the sick call sheets, they sign them, they're turned over to the clinic. Now, the process then when you guys offered was for them to make appointments, right? So when it comes to sick call, we're affording the entire jail sick call. We can only afford sick call on 2 tours. The 7 to 3 for the facilities that have 7 to 3, the 5 to 1 and 6 to 2. That's the first set of tours that offer sick call. The second tour is the 1 to 9, the 2 to 10, the 3 to 11. Emergency sick call, if something happens and a medical emergency is called, then they will come down on the midnight tour. So when we're talking about servicing the PICs during the day, let's be realistic about how we're doing this. If we have, let's give an example, 4 doctors in the clinic on a 7 to 3, the morning tours, how many PICs do you actually think we're going to see? Let me give you another example. EMCC is a new admission facility. It is hard to run multiple services at the same time and to afford medical attention. So when they are given sick call and we run them by the housing area, right? The pens can only hold a certain amount of PICs. We have to be careful how we place the PICs in these cells according to their affiliations, whether they have an affiliation or not. That's a security issue, right? Depending on the time frame, so let's say the morning tour, give an example, EMTC, sick call area. You have about 3 doctors. How many PICs do you think they can see in one tour? I'll give you maybe, if the doctor is seeing a PIC for 30 minutes and they're working for approximately 5 hours because they get a meal and sometimes their tours does not coincide with our tours. It is nowhere possible if 145 people signed up for sick call for us to afford 145 PICs medical on that tour. Now, if they push over into the afternoon tour, the 1 to 9, the 2 to 10, the 3 to 11, guess what? We have an overflow from the morning shift of the PICs that did not make it down, and now we have a new flow coming in for the evening tour. We have to be careful how we commingle PICs, not just for the safety of the PICs, but the safety of the clinic staff that's in there, as well as the doctors. Now, let's go back to the new mission process. As to answer your question, Mr. Ramos, How do we identify someone that is hearing impaired? I'm gonna be very honest with you. As an officer that worked in the clinic, dealing with the new admissions, sometimes the paperwork is marked, right? At that time, if we come across a PIC, because I've dealt with it myself working as a new admission officer, the other PICs in the pen will let you know that that person can't hear. So for the majority of the time, when we come into that issue, they'll write us a note, and we will notify medical. After they finish the intake process, that is no longer my concern as a new admission officer. When we come in contact with PICs that cannot see, they have different protocols for them. When we have PICs, for instance, that doesn't speak English, some of the officers speak Spanish, they communicate for us. We do have a language bank to communicate with the other PICs that doesn't speak English as their first language. So there's a few things that us as correction officers, because a lot of the things that I heard was placing the blame on the correction officer. So I'm here to represent us. So sick call was one. If we have 5 correction officers, 1 doing the aid station, 2 escorts, and 2 officers in the clinic that's making sure that the PICs are going to whatever doctors that's available at the time, there's only but so much we can do. We have to wait on medical to finish with them. We also, once again, have to be careful how we escort certain PICs because we can have a situation. When it comes to medical, we don't control medical. If we don't have enough medical staff, we then have to reach out to the island administrator. So it's a few different reasons as to why the PICs are not afforded medical. It's a sick call. The other issue is it depends on the facility. That plays another part because the new admission facility has more, has more availability for certain things because it's a new admission jail and they have 24 hours to get the PICs through the process. If we come across a PIC that needs mental health attention, now that doesn't fall on the correction officer because now we're waiting for the facility to either have a psychiatrist or for one to come in. Now, for someone that would study midnights, as a majority of the time, we did not have anybody for mental health services on the midnight tour. So that PIC, unfortunately, had to wait until the morning tour to see someone. So it's a couple of things that go on with this process. Yes, sick call could be handled in many different ways, but we have to be careful, and I stress careful on how we run that service. We don't want anybody else to get hurt, whether it's a PIC, a correction officer, or a medical staff. So that's something that I would like for y'all to take into consideration when y'all work out whatever y'all gonna work out with CHS and DOC, because we're also stakeholders. But for some part, a lot of these meetings, we are not part of. But we get blamed when it's not done. Now, when it comes to the mentally ill, I've been on this job since February 2006. And no, the mentally ill has not been dealt with, handled the correct way. And since I've been on the Corrections Officers Benevolent Association board, that has been my main focus, is the mentally ill. We are not equipped to handle them. I will say it every single meeting if need be. It is so easy for someone to have an opinion on how we should handle this particular type of PIC when you're not in that situation. But we're held at a higher standard all the time. I've had feces spreaded on me. I've had urine thrown on me. I've had multiple liquids that may not ever be identified. And y'all want us to be able to react in a professional manner 24/7. But when the same act is done in the streets, is considered a crime. When it happens to us, it's a different thing because we put our right hand up and we swore in as correction officers. It does not mean that I'm supposed to be assaulted in every which type of way there is. Now, the deadlock word that keeps coming up. Correction officers do not deadlock individuals. We do not have the power to deadlock anyone. Now, when it comes to deadlocking cells, if the person is out to court, yes, we put something up there to let the next officer know, do not open that cell because their property is in there. Because you know what happens if it gets open? All their stuff when they come back is gone. When they go out to services, we put something, identify the cell, so it's not open, so nothing can go and nobody can go in that cell. When the cells are down, we put something on there that we down the cell, which means no PIC will have access to the cell. Now, can we control the access to the cells if the door does not lock? No, we cannot. And it doesn't matter who you put on the floor. So I need you guys to understand what you are saying and the comments that are being said, because as a correction officer, it makes me cringe. A lot of you guys, excuse me, Skipper, you being a former PIC, I understand your gripes with certain things, but certain things I don't agree with. Ms. Pitts, you worked on this job, you know what it was to go through certain things. From the time I started, once again, to where I'm at right now, a lot of things that are going on behind Rikers Island, guess what? Wasn't happening in 2006. Now we could damn near be raped and nothing really happens. So let's make it make sense. It was another issue, I'm sorry. To add on when it comes to the deadlocks, decisions to lock in inmates within these mental observation units for safety reasons are made mutually between DOC supervisors and the medical staff, not by correction officers. Many people get up here and they say the correction officer. This young lady got up here and said the correction officers. Stop. We open and close cells. That's what we do. We do not have the authority to deadlock or lock anybody in unless there is an emergency situation. When we talk about the mentally ill, when CAPS first started, I was working in AMKC. We were supposed to get orderlies. We cannot make anybody take medication. We are not equipped for that. So why not put them where they belong, where they can get the proper help? My job as a correction officer is not to give out medication. My job as a correction officer is not to be a psychiatrist. My job as a correction officer is not to be a medical doctor. That's not my job. Let me do my job, and everybody else needs to do theirs. With keeping the mentally ill in PACE housing areas when they are to the point where the medical staff cannot deal with them, they are now transferred to Bellevue. How do you think they get there? Not the medical staff, the correction officers, right? So now we have to go in the housing area, escort them to the intake, get them on the bus or the ambulance, depending on how they're being transported, then get to Bellevue, escort them, and hopefully they're not fighting us, or for the vehicle into Bellevue. Then we go through our own procedures there, security procedures there, and then we have to wait on medical. So my problem with this is that the correction officer is always the blame. We are not. Understand my job title. You cannot be biased in your thoughts because of your experiences. Because if that was the case, I'd be biased about a lot of things. And that's not my position where I stand. My position here is to fight for the correction officers because as one, I am tired of getting blamed for some things that are just out of our control. When the PICs die, oh my, every time we have a death on Rikers Island, you know who gets blamed? The correction officer. We're not medical. Some of us don't know how to deal with having to deal with a deceased PIC. My first year on the job, I had to sit on a crime scene for a PIC. That's not easy. But it's easy for everybody to have an opinion. And not for nothing, when it comes to medical and it comes to the sites, it needs to be more hands-on. You go home, you're not doing 17, 18-hour days where you are dealing with smelling feces or having liquids thrown at you or trying to figure out if you're going to get assaulted today. You're not dealing with that. You go in your office. We have to be on the floor. No meals, have issues at home. A lot of us have children that have mental issues. And now we're at work and everything that we do, whether we don't react fast enough or we react too fast or it's a delay in our reaction, it's our fault. But you tell me if you could work 17, 18-hour days, 4 days in a row, don't get no sleep, and now have to go home and deal with a mentally challenged either child, a sibling, or a spouse. You tell me, can you do that? And be rationalized in your thoughts when you're at work and being blamed for everything. Right now, DOC is getting a lot of heat. And unfortunately, the correction officer is the out. This has to stop. We are here to work with everybody because not for nothing, everybody in this audience that works with DOC, y'all get to go home. Do you know if that correction officer got a meal today? Do you know if their family called and something happened and they need to have an emergency to go home? Do you know that some correction officers come to work and they have terminally ill situations going on with them, but they still come to work? Did you know that? No. That's not spoken about. But everything that's bad is spoken about. We don't control everything. It's impossible. But we have to work together to make it better for everybody, including the correction officer. One person said, oh, we need more training. How about you do what you're supposed to be doing? Because we're not medical. Now, when it comes to the medication, oh, let's talk about that. I've escorted nurses to areas where we give medication. So to say that they're being denied medication, inaccurate. They're not denied. They don't want it. They don't come for it. Is it documented? Yes, it is documented. Because when the nurse returns back to the pharmacy with the medication, they know who they gave medication out and who they did not. We as correction officers, we go in the housing area, we announce medication. We don't know who get what. That's not my job. My job is to make sure I go in a housing area and say medication afforded. I write it in the logbook on the B post. It's notated in the A post bubble. And then we go from one house to the next house. That is done on the 7 to 3 tour. That is done on the 3 to 11 tour, morning, evening tours. And it's also done on the midnight for court medication. All I'm saying is we got to find another way than blaming the correction officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Skip, question?
Oh, Ms. Anderson.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
so love when you sit up here. First of all, let me just address just a couple of your things.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that the sick call process is a logistical nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. But it would behoove us to make sure that the people in custody get the care that they need.
I'm not arguing with you.
How can we do that? That means that DOC has to work with CHS. That DOC needs to work with the officers. That DOC needs to hire additional officers, have additional staffing. So should CHS. Look, I'm okay with running sick call on the midnights if you had the appropriate staff. That's just one way out.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody needs to work together. And yes, I see where you're saying that the COs get the short end of the stick. You guys need to stand up and speak up to your leadership because we're here just making sure that the minimum standards are met. You guys need to speak to your leadership. Hold on. I said about multiple tours running sick call. And I understand you're not well equipped, which means read that as you don't get the appropriate training. Who should give you the appropriate training? It is your leadership.
I'm sorry. Appropriate training for what? We don't give out medication.
No, not to give out medication, but to be recognizant and empathetic toward mentally ill people, toward issues that they present. It's all about training. I am a certified peer and I'm trained to handle that. Now, if I can get that training, let me finish. If I can get that training, you guys can be afforded that training too. Nothing is exact. I'm not saying that you need to be trained up to the point where you are clinicians, but trained in how to understand, how to recognize, how to empathize, how to lean in instead of leaning away. Yes, there are trainings available, but again, that needs to be pushed up to your leadership to make that available for the staff. And my last thing, you said there's no deadlock. You said you don't have authority. We already know that. But I've heard from someone who has worked on a unit and has said this is happening. I have also heard from CHS leadership who has said that their staff has come back to them and said this is happening. We know officers don't have authority. We're not disputing that. What we are saying is that this is happening, and unless you're down in every PACE and MO unit on every tour and looking in the bubble to see whose cell is deadlocked and asking that question, why, if they're not at court or not at services, you don't know whether it's happening or not.
So I'm gonna say this. As somebody that has worked in a housing area, right? Currently now, no, I am not in a housing area, but I have staff, I have correction officers that work in that area. Once again, we do not deadlock inmates. Do we have emergency lock-ins? Yes, we do, for emergency situations. Now, let's talk about it. The gentleman from CHS came up here and said that they have escalated situations. So yes, during escalated situations, certain situations, yes, PRCs are to remain in their cells. Once again, not the correction officer making that determination. I get CHS point on how they feel that nobody should be locked in, right? But they do their 8 and they skate. We stuck there. So now, while we have a mentally ill person that can't control himself, he's refusing his medication, and he's assaulting every staff member, what are we to do with them? Because this happens every day. So I'm asking you, what should we do with extreme situations where we are being violently assaulted? What are we supposed to do with that PRC, ma'am?
Well, I am not quite sure, but I do know that your union officer rep, somebody, Benny Bosco or somebody has
The president?
publicly
Benny
stated
Bosco.
that this is happening. So for you to come up here and say this is not happening
What I
is
said
a-
to you
is a
was,
falsehood.
we don't have the authority to do that.
And
And what I
understand that.
asked you was, if this is the type of situation that we are dealing with, how can we deal with that certain individual?
Again, you guys need to push up for appropriate training, and I get it, it is not your fault. I'm not saying it is your fault. But if enough of the rank and file stood up and said, hey, we are not adequately trained, yes, you pay us, but we are not adequately trained for this. If enough of you guys stood up and said, we need training in order to adequately handle this, it might happen, but then we'd have to look at other things like funding and things like that. But I get it, it's all a logistical nightmare, and I get it, you guys are like always the low person on the totem, and you know what it says, when it starts snowballing and it all goes downhill, and you guys are on the end, I get that.
I'm going to end this dialogue now, but it's certainly appreciated. And I'll let you continue, Ms. Antoinette. Certainly is noted on the training, and it's certainly noted that 17, 18-hour shifts, when is the
Are bad.
time for training?
Yeah.
So, but you can continue.
I'm done. Any other questions? We can speak on the side, Ms. Kipper.
We will.
Any other questions, board members?
Thank you for your testimony, and I think the issue that you're elevating is important. I mean, like, many of the folks who are in Rikers have been failed by many, many other systems. And you are like the last hope, hopefully. The question that you're posing is, do you guys have enough of you and the right resources to do it? But I really value that you understand the mental health needs of many of the folks there. But it's not your fault that they're there. It's just that we have failed them in many other institutions before.
So let me ask you a question. Why we can't get the mentally ill hospitals reopened that can properly help them? Because Rikers Island is not equipped for them.
We have a national crisis of mental health, so if I knew that answer,
So we just have to deal with them on Rikers Island.
no, I think you're posing the right question. Why is Riker Island the place where they go? Maybe there could be other places.
Okay.
Is there a question? Board Member Pitts?
I don't know who can answer this, but I know years ago, prior to staff being assigned to a mental health housing area, they had to, sit through, I think it was 24, 36 hours of mental health training that did equip them to deal with mentally ill. Is that still an occurrence? Do we know, anybody?
So some of the areas that deal with the MOs, that deal with the MO population, their training for the most part are up to date. If I work, say I work in EMTC sentence area, for the most part, we all have yearly training. But once again, if I work 3 to 11 and I'm getting stuck every day for the midnight, how am I going to training?
Will you yield to the department?
Sure.
Commissioner Sanders? Saunders.
So I just want to augment what's been shared. So officers are provided with mental health first aid training, crisis intervention de-escalation training, crisis intervention training. They are provided with a lot of hours of training. But I think you touched on this, right? This is a national crisis. And I think that what we're experiencing is the criminalization of mental illness in this country.
Yes.
And that is the biggest issue that I think we need to confront, right? And the question, is Rikers Island the right place for it?
No.
That's another question that we as a society need to address, right? Rikers Island right now is probably the largest provider of mental health care in New York State, right? So I think that these are larger questions that obviously we're not going to resolve or answer here, but to focus on the training, I think that we can definitively state, right, in no uncertain terms, that our officers are provided with the requisite tools. But after how many hours? 2 tours?
16, sometimes 18, depending on if you get relieved on time.
That's a staffing issue.
Right. So this is a compounded issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but again, I'm up here just to focus on the training. So, but thank you for your.
Well, that was a wonderful moment. I hope we have a photo of that moment. Because that's the level of cooperation we really need as teamwork, to really, deal with these challenging issues. And again, I say, I'll ask the same question I asked to the advocate, to CHS and the department. Do you feel that the department is equipped to address and officer equipped to deal with these severe mental health issues on hand?
I believe that the severe mentally ill cases need to be where they belong, which is the hospital. We are a jail facility. We are not the hospital.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Antoinette and Koba? There being none, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your comments. We will now hear comments from the public. Jasmine will call the names of those who signed up to speak.
First, we have Michael Klinger, followed by Chaplain Dr. Victoria A. Phillips, and then Jennifer Parrish.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Klinger. I'm a jail services attorney with Brooklyn Defender Services, and thanks for the opportunity to provide some comment on today's agenda. In the 3 years since Brooklyn Defender Services, along with Legal Aid and Millbank, filed a class action lawsuit against the Department of Correction over its long and persistent failure to provide access to medical care and mental health treatment to those in its custody, the department's denial of access has only worsened. It is beyond appalling that people with mental illness are routinely locked in isolation and denied access to care. That these lock-ins are being done without any documentation by the department violates both the department's directives and the board's minimum standards. The board's minimum standards in a section entitled Limitations on the Use of Punitive Segregation state a variety of exclusions, including people with serious mental or serious physical disabilities or conditions. The board's July 18th, 2023 public meeting minutes reflect the department's report that in a process that was completed on June 27th, 2023, all ESH units were relocated from GRBC to RMSC, and the unit that it now refers to as RESH. The department told the board that those former ESH units at GRBC would transition to become PACE, CAPS, and MO housing units. Those units, as the Daily News reported this morning, are instead being used for solitary confinement. The board must prioritize consistent, unscheduled, unannounced visits to the units where the most vulnerable people are held to ensure that its standards are being met. In addition to urging the board to conduct robust monitoring of the conditions in all specialized housing units, we urge the board to take every action within its power to enforce the minimum standards that the administration seems intent on evading. And finally, with respect to the board's recommendations in its August report on utilization of sick call, we've detailed in the Agnew litigation, including in a motion for contempt filed in August of this year, the fundamental failure of department staff to ensure that people are produced from their housing units for medical treatment, a failure that includes clear instances of falsified data. More data reporting requirements will not improve access to healthcare if the department continues to falsify that medical production data. While we welcome additional oversight in this area, and has made abundantly clear in today's reporting on the impermissible and cruel treatment even of people with diagnosed mental illnesses, what is really needed is a shift in the department's culture. Considering that more than half of the people incarcerated at Rikers Island have been diagnosed with a mental illness, we urge the board and the city to move away from relying on a broken jail system to address mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chaplain Dr. Victoria A. Phillips.
Peace and blessings, everyone. It's a lot to say. I'm Chaplain Dr. Victoria Phillips. I'm speaking as myself today. I just want to start by saying I have never mentioned anyone's name on this record without addressing them directly prior about my concerns. Let's be clear, I'm far from a bully, rather a truth teller. But I have been bullied for coming forward for many years. I was so happy to see the former CHS worker finally speak her truth. The difference is I've been coming forward on the record for many years. I want to know how many lives does it take for y'all to start believing us? I have worked at Kirby, on Rikers, ER, and CPEPs, shelters for the mentally ill and chemically addicted. I've been urinated on. I've had feces thrown at me. I've even been bitten. I've medically restrained someone. However, never have I've medically restrained someone. However, if I didn't release those restraints every 2 hours, I'd be brought up on charges. DOC is not special service providers. Beat downs, lack of access to medical courts, etc. are all unconstitutional. For the past decade, I have stated on this record all that you have actually read today in the Daily News. So why did it take 13 years for any of it to be heard? How many lives have been lost? Regarding sick call, let's be clear. I can actually recall in this room Stanley Richards questioning Dr. Adams, DOC's former Dr. Adams, in this room on sick call in the overflow in 2019. It's 2024. Enough already. Do the work. Movement doesn't occur without an officer's permission. Dr. Homer has told you that on the record before, as have I and other medical people. Lastly, I want to say mental health and substance abuse, which is still a part of the DSM-5, impacts us all. The statement includes us in this room, detainees and staff. DOC still has not gotten mental health together. And I stood up here last time holding Charisma Jones' obituary, and it took so much for me not to say something last month because we did a rally before this hearing. And it's important for me to say because Charisma Jones was supposed to be released and she died in July, not being released. She was supposed to be released September 9th, the day before our last hearing. And it took so much for me not to say anything because I had to deal with her family. And what people don't realize is that woman went into jail at 23 years old, healthy. And the day before her funeral, I was making sure she was prepared for her funeral. And let me tell you something, her body was as if a fire victim. And so when we talk about sick call, when we talk about access to medical, when we talk, even when I was threatened this year, and I'll wrap it up, even when I was threatened this year, nobody wanted to hear me. Who fights for people behind the wall that don't have anybody listen to them? Who fights? I had a board member this year when I was threatened tell me, why don't I let it go? Who follows up with somebody when it's let go behind the walls? Please do your job. Hear us all. I'm targeted, but I still show up because, as she said, when she leaves the jail, she's tormented. Every time I leave Rikers, I'm tormented. I don't get paid for half the stuff I do, but I do it because I'm a human being and it matters. Do your job.
Thank you. Jennifer Parrish.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Parrish. I work at the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project. I'm grateful that the board added this discussion of deadlocking to your agenda. We know that request came at the last minute when this article came out, so thank you for giving it so much time at this meeting, and I appreciate all the thoughtful questions by the board members. Whatever it's called, deadlocking, involuntary lock-in, emergency lock-in, it all boils down to the same thing. It's solitary confinement. And it was outlawed by Local Law 42. The Halt Solitary Confinement Act doesn't allow anyone with a mental health issue to be in solitary. But even more importantly, and further back than that, is this board enacted a rule back in 2015 that says no one with a mental health disability should be in solitary confinement. So it's completely acceptable that that's happening right now in 2024. So I hope that you will investigate it. I have some suggestions about how you should do that. And I really appreciate the chair saying that this will be brought back at the November meeting to have more information shared with the public and to really hold DOC and CHS accountable, because the answers that you got at this meeting from DOC and CHS are completely unacceptable. How is it that DOC does not know anything about this process, but CHS tells you that they have a system, a monitoring system? That's how it was described. They have a monitoring system for when this happens. They also told you that this gets escalated up the chain. So why isn't the board hearing about this before? I mean, CHS knows that this is not supposed to be happening under the board rules. Why are they not going to you saying this is happening in this situation and dealing with the top level, the commissioner? I don't understand that. I hope that you will investigate it. I hope that not only the board members will go there unannounced, I hope that you'll have your staff doing that, but also your staff doing regular monitoring. I hope you'll look back at Genetech footage. I'm sure she's told us that these units were at GRVC, but I'm sure she can be more specific about that to the extent that it would show that how long someone's been in a cell. I think you should ask DOC to start recording out of cell time for each person on the unit. And having, I guess the other thing I want to say about this is I think there have been some really disparaging remarks made about people with mental health concerns. I understand that no one wants them in jail. We certainly don't want people with mental health concerns in jail. I'm all for this, and I hope the Board of Correction will keep pushing that. But these are human beings, and no matter what is going on with the correction officers, they should not be accepting that people just have to be locked in their cells. Where are folks going? They're going to a hospital. Guess what? They're not going to be in a cell. They're going to be taken care of. And you heard her say, Ms. Ruinsky say, people come back in a much better state. Why is that? Because they're receiving treatment. So the final thing I would just ask you to do is to talk to the State Office of Mental Health and the State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities to find out why are people staying in jail so long when they should be moved to those facilities? Because as you heard, these are people who've been found not competent to stand trial. OCA wants them to be moved to the facility. OMA should be dealing with that, and so should OPWDD. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Natalie Fiorenzo.
My name is Natalie Fiorenzo. I am a senior corrections specialist at New York County Defender Services. When Ms. Rosinski first called me to tell me about her time working at GRVC, I was trying to get as much information about what she saw as I could. After doing this work for 3 years, I have learned to ask for as much detail as I can when someone is sharing a story with me about an injustice on Rikers Island. I regularly hear of our clients getting locked in and regularly testify about it. A whole housing area at RNDC getting locked in for 6 days, no access to phones, showers, fresh air, finally calling their attorney on day 7 to let us know why they haven't been in contact. Our clients in RESH reporting no programming, no rec, or any sort of out of cell time for days on end. A client of ours asking an officer to check on a new person in the unit who's locked in immediately upon transfer to make sure that they're physically and mentally okay, with that officer responding, if he dies, he dies. I had even heard of our clients in mental observation units, MO units, being locked in. I testified in front of City Council and the board in September 2022 about a young client of ours who was locked in for multiple weeks in a mental observation unit at Rosie's. The conditions so dire and hopeless that she attempted to kill herself. My colleague testified a month later, 2 years exactly ago from today, that a different client at Rosie's called her about the MO units. This is someone in GP, reporting that the women in the mental observation units at Rosie's were living in cells that looked like pigs were living in them with them. They were being locked in regularly for extensive periods of time. Hearing about our more vulnerable clients in these conditions always shakes me just that much more. But it wasn't until I was typing up my notes from my conversation with Ms. Rosinski and continued meeting with her that the gravity of what she was saying really set in. Never did I expect to hear of these conditions in the PACE units. Never did I expect to hear that these were the conditions consistently and always in the mental health and PACE units island-wide. We advocate frequently for our clients to be transferred into PACE units. When someone is found mentally unfit for their case, they'll wait for 4 to 8 months for a hospital bed to open up for the Office of Mental Health. In these scenarios, we beg for them to be put in a PACE unit in the meantime. This is where I thought that our clients would remain relatively stable and cared for in such an extreme time of crisis. I always viewed PACE units as a golden ticket, the only housing areas on Rikers Island that were run effectively, where DOC staff are specially trained to care for this population, severely mentally ill detainees. How wrong were we? How many of our clients have we sent to a deadlock? The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. Here again, the department has failed. What Ms. Rosinski so bravely shared with the world today is undeniable proof of a deeply corrupt, unyielding culture of sadism on Rikers Island. There is no more time for DOC's 10 millionth chance. They come here repeatedly, regularly, and lie to you. They talk about the new class of corrections officers, about the Children's Museum visit area, about the tablets, with full awareness that deadlocking is happening at their facilities. Full awareness that medical professionals are pleading with their staff to let clients have a shower and to let clients have their medication, and full awareness that this flagrant lack of respect for medical expertise has caused the deaths of Charisma Jones, Joshua Baez, Michael Ortiz, Brandon Rodriguez, and many more. I have one last sentence. And you, members of the board, are asking CHS, why aren't you bringing medications to the cell? That's not the question. The question is to DOC, why are you deadlocking severely mentally ill husbands, daughters, fathers, brothers, humans as standard practice? It is unconscionable to allow this department to have human beings in their custody and under their rule for a second longer.
Thank you. Our next speaker is remote, Kayla Simpson.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Kayla Simpson. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Prisoners' Rights Project. Natalie is right. We should all be in tears. Deadlock is a horror. It is a horror that is not isolated. And as you've heard today, it is regular enough to have a name, to have a tag, to be the subject of CHS staff meetings. It's known to DOC staff, it's known to people in custody, it's known to volunteers. And this is the culture at DOC, that despite the regularity of this practice, you won't find it on any logbooks or in a policy. DOC spokespeople will deny it, but it is there every day, despite the fact that it violates minimum standards, that it violates a court order in our Agnew case, that it violates HALT. It's there because everyone points fingers at everyone else. It's there because officers and captains and ADWs walk by it and do nothing. Wardens permit it as they permit so many failures. Executive staff take a posture of surprise and furrowed brows, just like they did today, over and over again. And it took a brave CHS whistleblower for us to be talking about it here. It should break our hearts that so often the reaction from people in custody when they hear things like the CHS ex-staffer speaking about it is finally they're saying it. Maybe somebody will believe us now. Because you know who literally does not get to go home? The people in those cages. And I have to reiterate that these issues, flagrantly violating laws and policies, falsifying reporting, a complete dereliction of duty by supervisors, abusing lockdowns by all sorts of names, they aren't isolated to MO and PACE units. I could talk to you for hours about how these fundamental failures run rampant in our Nunez case, where there's a contempt and receivership motion pending. And as Mr. Klinger noted, the Agnew team recently filed another contempt motion because DOC does not bring people to their medical appointments. We told the court there's a widespread practice of falsifying refusals, that DOC has an obligation to ensure people in clear distress have access to emergency care. And what does DOC say time and again to the court, to you, to media? They say they're doing what they can. But today we're here again, hearing about people banging on their cells, screaming relentlessly, smearing feces on themselves, sitting catatonic with bugs crawling on them, needing medication the jails won't let them have, fearfully asking mental health staff, am I going to be caged? Are we doing what we can? This should make us furious. It should make us furious that abuse is a feature and not a bug. It is used to control. It's used to punish, because this city has no better answers for mental health crises. FOBA says DOC staff aren't equipped to handle this. On that, I think we can all agree. And DOC representatives today swept right past the firsthand account of the CHS staffer about the widespread complicity of DOC staff. They speak as if from a different universe about how this is their policy, not their policy, and they don't tolerate it. We are always hearing about their surprise, their serious intention to address issues. It is not enough. It should make us furious. But more than that, it should make us diligent. And I know I'm out of time. I want to echo the asks that Jennifer Parrish made today. One of your biggest, most powerful tools is the spotlight that you can shine on these things. We need you to shine it all the time, in every dark corner. And you know that we will be behind you when you need additional resources, every step of the way. But we need you to go into the jails and to open the doors of those walls to show the public stuff like what the CHS staffer told us today. That's the only thing that matters. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Eileen Meyer.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Eileen Marr. I'm a civil rights union leader from Boca, New York, a social worker and a survivor of Rikers Island, where I spent over 427 days. Before I say what I had planned to say, I just want to know about the individuals who are, whether they are planning it or it's uncontrollable with smearing and playing with their feces. On 3 occasions, 3 different women who did these such things when I was incarcerated told me, who did not know each other, and this was all at different times, that one of the reasons they did it was to keep the officers from raping them. So take that with what, you know. So the fact of the matter is that Rikers as a whole is a human rights disaster. For example, at intake, don't let DOC and the lackluster medical staff fool you. The detainee will wait for as little as 12 hours and as long as multiple days, a process that needs to only take 3 or 4 hours at best. The detainees languish in the bullpens, usually without toilet paper, water, women's sanitary products, and medicine. Corrections staff will spend more time conversing and socializing and periodically ridiculing the detainees, and rather than hurrying up and getting the job done. It's a waiting game, and it's just a game to them. Detainees are still being locked in their cells for sometimes entire shifts or more. DOC will label any and all situations as emergency to justify this, even when they are not, mostly when they are not. The fact of the matter is that Rikers must close in less than 3 years. And in order to accomplish this, everyone needs to do their part. From an infusion of community services to DOC, to Health and Hospital, CHS, and to the Unified Court System. We are all responsible. Locking people in cells for days at a time, withholding medicine, water, and toilet paper and other sanitary products, and denying programming will not accomplish this. Quite the opposite. Illegally utilizing solitary confinement under any name, title, or whatever exacerbates one's already precarious health and mental health, thus paving the way for future problems and recidivism. This applies to the torture and abusive nature in which COs are allowed to continue with, continuing the century-long and prominent culture of corruption without holding DOC responsible must end. Every month, my fellow advocates and I repeat what must be done to not only facilitate Rikers closing, but to eradicate the mind-boggling human rights disaster that it is notorious for. In closing, I would like to quote, as a good New Yorker, Allen Ginsberg from his work America, because it is relative to DOC's current and long history of torture, abuse, and indifference. America, when will you be angelic? When will you take off your clothes? When will you look at yourself through the grave? When will you be worthy of your million Trotskyites? And why are your libraries all full of tears? Dismantle the DOC, close Rikers sooner, not later. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Danielle Gerard.
you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Executive Director, and members. My name is Danielle Gerard. I'm a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights. We advocate on behalf of young adults on Rikers. Ms. Rosinski, thank you for your whistleblowing. You are very brave. In Children's Rights June 12th public comment, we urged the board to eliminate enhanced supervision housing, secure unit, and the risk management accountability system, and to bring any form of restrictive housing into strict compliance with local law 42's provisions concerning out of cell time, congregate activities, de-escalation, length of stay, and more. Any method of isolation not in compliance with local law 42 is punitive segregation and tantamount to torture for all incarcerated persons, especially for youth up to age 25. The mayor has taken it upon himself to render local law 42 toothless. We have now learned about a unique method of torture carried out by the DOC on Rikers mental health units. The mayor and the DOC continue the tired old line that solitary confinement does not exist in the city's jails. The mayor and the DOC are lying. Ms. Rezovinsky's testimony proves that yet another form of solitary confinement does exist on Rikers and for the most vulnerable people on the island. No agency testifying today took responsibility for this latest in a never-ending series of horrors on Rikers. What are you, the Board of Correction, going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this concludes our public comment section. And right now we'll go into matters of discussion and decision. Next on the agenda are 3 proposed resolutions for discussion and decision.
Sure stays there. Let's see.
No, we didn't.
Here you stay.
We're going to vote.
Okay.
They sit down and say, how many hours I've been sitting here? 4 hours. Well, yeah, Jesus.
I'm surprised my bladder hasn't exploded.
I'll let you know.
I'm not aware.
Everybody, baby.
3-minute break.
We'll continue.
When they have someone, no, I don't think it's gonna can't handle. So they send them out.
The meeting is still going on, so.
You don't have to leave.
So, but those who are leaving, we just wait.
This is not a.
It's not executive session, but if those who would like to leave, please, we'll wait for you. Yeah, well,
Yeah. It is. It's a niche.
Going to the bed.
Okay.
It started, started, I certainly moved off, it started closing the mental. Yeah.
4 years that you had.
We're not taking a recess. Those who would like to review the resolutions for a few moments before we begin.
In the public aware that these resolutions were coming out
The agenda's been public.
from the board vote.
The agenda has been public.
And when was that placed?
Publish the agenda.
Which is brought, this weeks. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Should have ran to the bathroom.
I can read the first.
We're gonna wait 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Got 2 people missing.
Board members can take the time to review the resolutions and to give a little time for 2 board members to return. We will not go into recess.
Gotcha.
That's even. Yeah. Yeah. It's just. I need to see with code extent that.
No, exactly.
To be incompetent.
Exactly. Mm-mm.
Almost. He's right outside the door.
No, you want to visit the.
Excuse me, Ms. Blackman, could you ask Board Member Ramos, I think he's right outside the door, to come inside, please?
Good question.
Is this a bit, I just left the frame.
That's the office's A station.
He's a magician.
We go into the housing area.
I haven't even eaten.
Well, they're all made different, but let's
At
say
all.
you go, it's going to be
Boots. Eating.
where that boy and that all the hands
I
of
can't have
the
lunch because the time I should
of
be
the house
here.
and various law
And then I
groups
get
in
here.
there
I usually brought
to record movement.
I was gonna get a hot dog
And
for
then
his
a
family.
control
But then I
panel to
realized
open
how easy it
bells.
was the last time.
Yeah.
I said no.
Yes. Mhm.
Like a lighthouse.
Okay, good, say, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
right.
Because I was confused. I was.
You mentioned how the.
Yeah, the A station,
Okay.
synonymous with it.
I'm looking for it. Thank you.
And it used to be like, I don't know if they still do it, but in cell areas, every hour from the seven,
You didn't have to
from
go to
the
bathroom
day
right
toward
away.
to the evening, to allow the people in custody an option. An option means every hour you open all the cells so that they could go in, retrieve things or whatever, and you lock them up. You give them about maybe 5-6 minutes. Yeah, so if there were people in custody that were out of the area for court or the clinic or law library, you would deadlock their cell.
Right.
So this way, when you did the group knob to open all the cells, those that were on deadlock would not get, because you would not open cells one at a time. For the option,
Right.
you would open all the cells, except for the ones that you put on deadlock.
Yeah, and
So
it
that's where
happened.
that term, yes, and if I even remember, the old panel board may have even had the word deadlock.
Okay, okay, okay.
I'm not sure, I don't recall. Mhm. So far, we keep this up. We will be getting to this meeting without vitriol. So far, so far.
Okay, we'll continue at this time. Noting that this was a time to review the 3 resolutions before the board. So we'll start with the first resolution with its reading, maybe not in its entirety unless clarification is needed. And we'll start with the first resolution. Jasmine, if you can read, or Melissa, if you'd like to read the resolution.
The first resolution is an amendment to Article 6, Section 4 of the board's bylaws regarding committees proposed by Chair Sampson. It reads, whereas New York City Charter, Section 626B, and I'll note it's on page 14 of the materials before the board. Whereas New York City Charter, Section 626B authorizes the Board of Correction to adopt rules to govern its own proceedings. Whereas pursuant to this authority, the board established rules of procedure, which were last amended on September 10th, 2024. Whereas Article 6 of the board's rules of procedure sets forth that the board shall establish committees as it deems necessary and that no board member shall serve on more than 2 committees. Whereas Article 6 of the board's rules of procedure, as amended on September 10, 2024, establishes that members of each committee shall be appointed by the chair, who may designate one of them as chair, and that any board member may propose establishment of a committee of the board to the chair. Whereas Board Chair Sampson proposed amending Article 6, Section 4 of the Rules of Procedure to read as follows. All board members are encouraged to participate in the work of the board's committees. No board member may simultaneously serve as chair on more than 2 committees. Board members may simultaneously serve as committee members on more than 2 committees. Now therefore be it resolved that Article 6, Section 4 of the Rules of Procedure are amended as proposed. It is further and finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be posted conspicuously on the board's website.
If I can get a motion for the resolution,
I move to approve the resolution.
is there a second?
Second.
Any questions?
Questions or discussion on?
That's a question or discussion, yes.
Oh, I don't think we need this resolution. I mean, to the extent that it allows the board to appoint and as members of the committee, and it doesn't say that he's able to remove members from the committee, but he's certainly taken that position in the past. I don't think that given this situation of this board at this time, that the chair should be given additional authority regarding appointing more than, you can chair more than 2 committees, and you can chair and people can be on, up to 4 people can be on any committee, and it doesn't say that they're going to be different people. And the previous experiences that qualified people were removed from committees, and I don't have confidence in this chair to create fair committees which represent the board. So I would urge people to vote no.
Further discussion or questions?
I have a question. You know, again, I could use clarification. My understanding is that besides that, the difference between this proposal and the rules before, what are they? I mean, I know that the rules before did include that no one should lead more than 2 committees. No one should be in more than 2 committees. Is the difference, what is the difference between these and before? Is who appoints folks?
You know, it's stated pretty clearly in the resolution. You know, board members want to contribute to the work of the board in restricting the number of committees to any board member. It's, you know, it's a disservice to this board and the work that we do. Yes, you know, as far as for management and control of the process for a board, restricting that to no more than 2 chairships is reasonable.
But is that different than the language before?
It is different than
Because before you can only do one, share one subcommittee?
No.
So,
I'm only listening to the resolution before us. I don't have the reference in front of me.
Okay.
Can you remove people from committees?
I would assume if there's justification in my authority, yes, I would say that.
With justification or by authority?
Well, I would say justification and authority, yes.
There has to be a reason.
I don't understand the point of your question.
Well, I don't know why I was removed from the committee before. I didn't hear the justification for removing me from the committee, which I had served on, which I wanted to continue to serve on, which I provided expertise that was not present on the committee, and you removed me from the committee. So I'm just trying to understand if you think you will have the authority to do that again.
Well, I don't, you know, I mean, I can be direct and talk about process of term limits to this board in input of information and thought. 15 years, you know, and I don't want to go into this, you know, we can sit on the side and talk But
I want to
15
go
years,
into it.
15 years on the board, and I'll move forward. Yes, go ahead, Judge.
You know, I guess, Dr. Cohen, I think we have a resolution before the board, and really, your issue is not germane to the resolution. The resolution does really one thing. It provides that board members may simultaneously serve on more than 2 committees, but no board member can chair more than 2 committees. That's all that this resolution
I understand.
does. It changes. It doesn't speak to the issues that you are raising. So I don't think this is the appropriate time.
Oh, I was asking this, if the board.
We will move forward at this time.
Come on.
Well, you can come on. There's a resolution beyond the floor. And
And I was appointed by the city council
Okay.
multiple times. You didn't appoint me, and you can't fire me.
at this point,
So the 15 years is not a criticism. It should be an honor.
at this point, I'll call for a vote on the resolution as is.
Can I, just a question, because I would love to hear from you. Because the way I read it is that no board member can participate in more than 2 committees.
No, no, you're reading it incorrectly.
Okay, can you help me out, please?
No board member may serve as chair
Okay.
of more than 2 committees.
And these other
But
factors.
board members may serve on more than 2 committees. Before, board members were limited to serving on 2 committees. Only.
Okay.
So, no, if there's no further questions, I'll move to a vote. And this will be a roll call vote. Vice Chair Skip?
Because I am slightly concerned about language, at this time, I'm gonna say no.
Board Member Frank?
Can I propose a change to the language that will include that all board members should participate in committees?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I mean, the fact that, like you say very clearly, board members should be encouraged to participate in work of the board committees. I think it would be pertinent to say all board members will engage in subcommittees of some sort. I mean, the idea of the board is for you to engage them, not to disengage them. So if there could be some language to make sure beyond us, because we are here limited, the board members are always encouraged to be part of the board. Like, I mean, could that be a better way of making sure that there's a full board participation?
I'm not clear on your amendment or your statement of your amendment.
So the amendment would be that all boards are engaged in committees. All board members.
Every board member will serve on one committee,
A
at
committee.
least one committee.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to be part of the board. I mean,
I think it's inherent.
okay, but if that language could be added, then it would really
I
communicate.
think it is inherent, and I think by adding that language, you cause conflict with other rules and procedures that are already a part of this board,
Which ones?
that the chair appoints the committees.
So you could appoint them to whatever committee
You're
you
gonna send
decide.
the same 4 people to all the
Excuse me,
committees?
you're out of order, Mr. Cohen.
Question, Chair.
Yes.
Can you appoint the same 4 people to all committees?
That's not what it says.
Same as it was before. People got together and changed the bylaws unbeknownst to a few of us and said almost the same thing that's being said right now. I don't get it.
I mean, Ms. Pitts, I'm just reading it as someone who will read this as a potential member of the board that will say that my contribution will be determined by others or maybe limited. That may not attract the best board member.
You have an amendment that you recommended. Is there a second to your amendment? And is it clear?
Okay, so I could just help, but the amendment would be that the board will make sure that all members are engaged in participation in committees.
But suppose there's only one committee. Because the board hasn't always had a committees,
Okay.
okay? So why do we want to constrain ourselves in that way? The only committee I'm aware of, and excuse me for out of order here, but let's move this along. The only is the deaf committee. Otherwise, in that there were no other committees.
You're on the
for my
sheriff committee.
committee. Which one was it?
You have two committees.
Yeah, that was, but it
Created
wasn't always. The women was the new thing, programs was the new thing. Before that, it was just the deaf. So, and everybody couldn't be on the deaf.
Sure.
So, I mean, why would we want to constrain ourselves to everybody must serve on a committee? Some things don't even require a committee, actually, in my opinion.
So I'm not saying that all things require a committee either.
Excuse me, if there's.
The board has, if a member of the board should have the opportunity to be on a committee.
I think it says that, doesn't it?
Doesn't say that.
Hearing no second to an amendment, we will move to a vote, and we are in the voting process. So, Mr. Franco, how do you vote?
I'm concerned about people being attracted to this board in the future, so no.
Okay, Dr. Cohen,
No.
Judge Cozier,
Yes.
Board Member Pitts,
Yes.
Board Member Ramos,
Yes.
Board Member Jude Torsa,
Yes.
and I vote yes. The resolution carries.
Did I just say something?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, because it says here, Franco, it says here, all board members are encouraged to participate on committees. So that doesn't sound okay.
It does. The challenge is the context where we're at. I mean,
Maybe you might not even have time to be on a committee.
sure, that could be
You
the,
don't want to be made to be on a committee. The language that you're talking.
okay.
Well, you know, the resolution has passed by a vote of 5-3. And we'll move on to the next resolution, and I'll have it read by the Executive Director, Jasmine.
The next resolution is proposed by Chair Sampson, establishing a minimum standards review committee and a personnel practices committee. It reads as follows. Whereas New York City Charter, Section 626B, authorizes the Board of Correction to adopt rules to govern its own proceedings. Whereas pursuant to this authority, the board established rules of procedure which were last amended on September 10th, 2024. Whereas Article 6 of the board's rules of procedure sets forth that the board shall establish committees as it deems necessary, that members of each committee shall be appointed by the chair, who may designate one of them as chair, and that any board member may propose establishment of a committee of the board to the chair. Whereas New York City Charter, Section 626E, authorizes the board to establish minimum standards for the care, custody, correction, treatment, supervision, and discipline of all persons held or confined under the jurisdiction of the Department of Correction. Whereas pursuant to its charter mandated duty to establish minimum standards, it is the duty of the board to ensure that the minimum standards reflect best medical and mental health practices and accurately represent the current state of operations in correctional facilities. Now therefore, be it resolved that the board will establish a minimum standards review committee to review the minimum standards and make recommendations accordingly. And it is further resolved that the board will establish a personnel practices committee to review business practices of organizational structures and operational practices of the board, and board staff must adhere to requests for information and meetings with the committee. It is further and finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be posted conspicuously on the board's website.
Is everyone clear with the resolution? I'll take a motion to move the resolution.
I have a motion to deny the resolution. Does that count?
I have a question. Have we,
Well, you can't have a question on the resolution until it's moved and seconded.
it's a legal question, we should know.
Okay.
There needs to be a motion on that.
We have to have a motion. Is there a motion on the floor, a resolution?
Are you, well, can I speak?
No, 1 second, please, unless you are moving the resolution.
No, I was going to establish a question about both parts of this resolution. I do want it to be known that board staff is understaffed and under capacity at this moment, and we do have several pertinent issues coming up. While I do agree that a minimum standards review is necessary, I'm just really of a mind to think that not right at this moment. And if you notice, my next resolution is to establish priorities for 2025. Perhaps we can move that into 2025 when the office of the Board of Correction is fully staffed and able to really dive fully into this work. And the second part of this amendment are personnel practices committee to review business practices of organizational structure and operational practices of the board. Like, I really don't even understand what this is about. And I think this is going back to things we have already hashed and rehashed again. So this definitely needs to be removed. We are not here to look at personnel practices. The only personnel that is involved with the Board of Correction is the office of the Board of Correction, and the personnel practices is capably handled by the executive director. This is far beyond our purview.
First of all, we'll not go into staffing issues. If that's the case, we'll go.
But then explain.
Okay, let me speak. Okay, please.
Listen, just calm down a minute. Just
I am
explain to
calm.
me what
Let me
personnel
speak.
practices
Let me speak.
mean.
Okay.
Explain that.
First of all, if there's no motion on the floor, you're out of order. Let's see if there's a motion to the floor and a seconded, and then we can have this discussion. If there's no motion on the floor, then the resolution does not move.
That's good.
Better have a,
No.
No. Is there a motion? There being no motion, this resolution is not being moved forward at this time. So there's no further discussion on it.
I do have a question.
Okay. No,
There's another.
hold on. Till they come up again.
Yes, Mr. Ramos.
Chair, I got the feeling from what I hear is that people are confusing personal practices with business practices. And there's two different animals there. Personnel practices, as I've been a part of in the past, in the settlement house structure, was to be able to look at the people that were under my supervision and seeing exactly what the needs were in order to be able to implement the programs that I was how do you call it, given to run at the settlement house, but also to make sure that I got the funding that I needed in order to be able to hire the particular staff and also to provide the training that they needed. And not only but the training that they needed, but to travel, but be specific to the board of directors, who was the president, whoever it is, with my expenditures, and so that they knew exactly when I went to them requesting funds for expansion of program, that they would already know what was available, and maybe they could implement more funding so that I can continue running my programs.
100%.
That was the personal practices, not a business type of thing.
Mr. Ramos, you
where-
had a point of procedure.
I believe this is all out of order.
It's all been out of order.
Well,
It's all been out of order.
but-
All
but
of
we're
the
not
discussions,
discussing this.
it's all been out of order, yes. It's all been out of order.
I don't know
And
what
I'm
you're
just
talking
giving a courtesy.
about. You're usually out of order. I
Okay,
appreciate
it's
that.
all.
You know, hold on. But I was interrupted, and I didn't finish
I was
speaking.
just saying. that-
I was interrupted.
Oh, well,
I didn't finish speaking.
The board recognized.
And the fact was that I was recognized by the chairs. And the fact is that I was trying to explain how I was privy to, and I practiced personnel practices at the settlement house. And not to get it confused with business, practices. And basically, it was to help and to improve what I was doing, rather than to have somebody dictate to me how to run it. And basically, that was it.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos.
There is a resolution that was read. There was no motion and no second. Therefore, the resolution is dead. I must say that for the public record, with the resolution not being passed since I presented it, it will weigh heavily on my decisions on continuing with this board, because I believe that this resolution gives me the tools and the committee the tools to gain confidence in staff. And so I'll let that stand for the record. We'll go on to the next resolution, please.
The third resolution proposed by Vice Chair Skipper establishes a 2025 Board Priorities Committee, and it reads as follows. Whereas New York City Section 626B authorizes the Board of Correction to adopt rules to govern its own proceedings, whereas pursuant to this authority, the board established rules of procedure which were last amended on September 10, 2024. Whereas Article 6 of the board's rules of procedure sets forth that the board shall establish committees as it deems necessary, that members of each committee shall be appointed by the chair, who may designate one of them as chair, and that any board member may propose establishment of a committee of the board to the chair. Whereas New York City Charter Section 626C4 grants the board the power and duty to evaluate departmental performance. Whereas New York City Charter Section 626E authorizes the board to establish minimum standards for the care, custody, correction, treatment, supervision, and discipline of all persons held or confined under the jurisdiction of the Department of Correction. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board will establish a committee to set the board's priorities for the year 2025 regarding measuring the department's and correctional health services compliance with minimum standards and other areas of departmental performance related to the conditions of the city's jails. And it is further and finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be posted conspicuously on the board's website.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions and on the resolution? Go ahead, Vice Chair Skip. Dr.
Yes.
Cohen and Franco.
This is my resolution. I think that we need to really lean into creating some priorities. There's been some things that have been allocated and things that we need to do, but nothing will get done unless we set some specific priorities, especially as we move into the new year. There are also things that we said we were going to do this past year that are still ongoing and continuous. So I think we just need to pull together instead of having all of this infighting and just look at what are our priorities. We know what we're here to do. Let's establish some priorities and move this work forward. Let's do what we're here to do.
Dr. Cohen?
I strongly support the resolution. I think it's actually required by the city that we develop a program for each year, and this will be a way for us to do it collectively.
Board Member Franco, and then Board Member Judge Cruz.
Just a comment, or I will encourage us to look into the strategic plan that was developed for the board, I believe by Bennett Midland a couple of years ago. I don't know if we have seen it as a group, but I know there was a group of really well-known, high-level, expensive consultants paid by Ford Foundation to help us out with that. And I think we should revise it, all of us as a team.
Judge Cruz?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with certainly looking at the minimum standards, because I think that that is the primary charge of the board in the charter. I don't know that it's necessary to each year have a priorities committee, which is going to be a short-term committee, rather than having a standing committee on minimum standards and establishing and updating the minimum standards, because that is the primary charge of the board. So, you know, conceptually, I don't have a problem with the idea of dealing with the minimum standards, and I thought that part of the previous resolution is absolutely fine. But, you know, I don't think that we need to have a priorities committee in order to do that. I think we need to have a standards committee, which is the key here.
I think we have Board Member Pitts and then Jude.
I agree with Mr. Cozier. I think it should be the minimum standards. I agree with the resolution, the prior resolution, the first half of the prior resolution, that we deal with the minimum standards. It will encompass everything.
Jude,
So,
Board Member Jude. And
Yeah, I just
then
had-
go to Vice Chair Skip and then Dr. Cohen.
Ramos.
Ramos
just
had your
had,
hand up? I didn't see you. Board Member Jude and then Board Member Ramos.
So I just want clarity in terms of how this differs from the original charter. Because minimum standards is listed as part of our mandate.
Right.
So in terms of clarity, what exactly are we hoping to establish? That's different or differing from what's already at play.
Can I respond to that?
You're the author, yes, you can respond.
So in responding to this, because I'm the author of this resolution, as you know, we have 3 separate minimum standards. We have a mental health minimum standards, we have medical minimum standards, and then we have, I believe it's the general care, custody, and control. So when I say prioritize, each of these different minimum standards encompass a lot.
Right.
We're looking at mental health care, we're looking at medical care, and then we're looking at regular care, custody, and control on Rikers Island. So when I say prioritize, let's get together and decide. We need to go through everything, of course, but can we? Do we have the capability? Does the Office of the Board of Correction have the capability to go through everything at once? We all know that they do not. So let's prioritize. What parts of the minimum standards are we looking at first? Are we looking at medical? Are we looking at mental health? Are we looking at the general care, custody, and control? And let's move forward accordingly. So I'm not trying to take away from the fact that we need to look at the minimum standards, but just being mindful to the fact that looking at it all at once is overwhelming to an already understaffed staff. And if we kind of prioritize and said, okay, we're going to look at these few sections now, and then maybe 3 months from now, we'll look at the next few section, and then we'll dive into another section, just having some clarity and cohesiveness on how we look at it.
I mean, your point is well taken. I think for me, I think we're working on that simultaneously as it is, depending on what topics take priority. So it just seemed a bit redundant, but I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
I think it was Dr. Cohen. You had a question? Or?
Well, I think priorities don't set themselves, and there are 6 chapters. You know, there's a unit of segregation chapter, there's a general conditions chapter, there's a mental health, there's a medical health, there's a PREA chapter. There are a lot, and each of these chapters has 20, 30 things in them. So, so we should focus, and things will come up which we'll have to address, but as a for the mayor, which we are required to do, for the mayor's management report, we should say what our priorities are for the coming year. And I think that's a totally reasonable thing. And a committee is a way of having all the board's involvement, because it will come up with a report and the board will discuss it.
Okay, so there's a resolution on the floor. Mr. Ramos?
No, I'm just listening to what's going on, and I don't, I agree with Skip on a couple of occasions there, but I also look at the people that are working for the Board of Correction. We minimize ourselves and we what's the word? I can't get it out now. That's right. A particular situation, we're gonna limit our people out in the field to what they could do. They are diverse and they cover all aspects of things. And if we're just prioritizing on one particular subject, we're gonna focus on that and forget about the rest of it, because we take a long time in deciding, even in little situations here, it'll take a year to help that individual out in the field, you know, complete their duty and responsibility to the board. I also, I agree fully with the judge in terms of his explanation, in terms of duplicating the thing. We're here to go over and to monitor the minimum standards of the agency in totality, not separately. So I am for in concurrence with the judge, and that's where I stand.
Yes, Board Member Pitts.
I think the 2 resolutions should be combined to be one. I think you 2 should work on it and with the minimum standards along with the prioritization. I think they should be combined.
If there's a recommendation for an amendment, we can hear that.
I know.
Lose it, you know?
Okay, I should consider. I make a motion that both resolutions be combined. Is there anyone that seconds it?
Do you want me to clarify by reading the portions that you just parsed out?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, there's a motion on the floor to work to combine. We don't have the specific language.
I think you 2 could come up with the language.
Only thing I can say, in the interest of time, I'm willing to recess to work with the vice chair to come up with language that might be appropriate to and acceptable to you, Board Member Pitts. So if that's acceptable to this board, we will take a 10-minute recess so that the vice chair and I can see if we can come up with a presentable combined resolution. So at this time, a 10-minute recess. Please set the clock. Is there a motion for a recess?
No motion for a recess. I don't think we should have a recess. I don't think we should have a private discussion. I think we should vote on the resolution that we have in front of us.
Is there a motion for the recess?
I make a motion for the recess.
Is it seconded?
No. Let's hold on this.
Let's hold on this. Let's get up. So therefore, we'll go to a vote on the resolution on the floor. Vice Chair Skip,
I vote yes.
Franco, Board member?
Setting up priorities, yes.
Board member Cohen?
Yes.
Board member Cozier?
No.
Board member Pitts?
No.
Board member Ramos? Nope. Board member Jude Tucson?
I just want to say that I totally understand Vice Chair Skipper's proposal. I think it makes sense, but just as we were just apprised of the seriousness of deadlock, I think we need to be sort of fluid in terms of how we deal with things. So I would vote no for now.
Okay, and I vote no. The resolution fails. There is no other business before this board. Thank you, everyone, who attended and participated in today's meeting. The board's next meeting is scheduled to take place on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 at 1 p.m. A motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Somebody second the motion to adjourn.
There's a motion on the floor to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second. Absolutely.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
10 minutes.
Tell them, without hearing the objection, meeting is now adjourned.
Back to work.
We better go back to work? No.